Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another stream. Hope you're all doing well. SinclairLore, nice to see you again, as always. Abyss One, uh, Alhazred's Gaming Goo, welcome into the stream, as well as Rat and KD and your red dog. I almost feel like I should call you Clifford, but that might be a little bit rude. Hope you're all doing well. So yesterday we went ahead and watched Elden Ring's Hidden Story by Angel of the Past, which was a bit of a trip to say the very least. And then we finished things off by watching Quaylog's The Elden Ring Keeps Me Up at Night. So to continue with our lore video reaction stream playthrough, we're going to go into one of SinclairLore's videos today. Radagon and Marika, 1-2 a fusion, a shattering, Elden Ring lore. And then after that, we will look at Radagon is a Mimic of Marika by Kosmos. And potentially, if we still have time, I kind of want to look at the Artificial Lord Theory by Honored Madman. So it seems like today is going to be a little bit thematic between Radagon and Marika. So hope you're all strapped in. And just to reiterate what I've said on some of the previous streams, the goal of these reacts aren't to tear down the other content creators. It's to see what other people have thought of the games, to kind of share in our perspectives of the game, and to just kind of grow as a community and to offer constructive feedback where we can, and to just kind of have a good time while we're doing it. So I do want to remind everyone that SinclairLore is in chat, so please be kind. She has always been very helpful and kind towards other content creators and has lifted many a content creator up, as well as, of course, Sophie Polbeam with her. So excited to have the opportunity to look at one of her videos, or their videos on stream, I suppose I should say. And yeah, we'll get on into it. Wesley DeSouza, welcome in. Shiny Evany, nice to see you again. Astanex. Clifford isn't as adorable as you are. Very nice. Okay. So, alright, let's go ahead and dive on into Radagon and Marika, 1-2 a fusion, a shattering by SinclairLore.
Hi, Sophie.
Hi, Sin.
Hi, everyone.
I think I need to
And
turn it down a
welcome to
little
the
bit.
Snack Covenant, episode 293.
Hopefully that's
And
good.
today, we're going to discuss Marika and Radagon.
Or are they the one person?
Or are they Maragon or Radika?
But that's their celebrity power couple name.
Yes.
I'm glad that you say Marika or Maragon and Radika as well, because I tend to do that interchangeably on the Discord at times. So at least I'm not alone.
Yeah.
If people wanted to know what's up with Radagon and Marika, why didn't they just ask the little slug who cannot tell a lie?
So, welcome to everyone who's listening to this for the first time.
Yeah, I feel like the Tarnish should just ask Ronnie what the hell's going on.
This topic stuck out to me because I remember when that E3 2019 trailer dropped. I was the one, predictably, saying, hey, what if that character is gender fluid and keeps switching between male and female? And that is kind of what happened. Everything else I predicted was wrong, but that worked. And I'm clinging to that as my one Elden Ring prediction that actually worked.
So, Sophie.
Yeah.
Radagon and Marika, tell me more.
So we're going to start now.
Hold on, Sin, we need the hidden lore. Which one of you is Sophie right now, and which one is Sinclair between these two?
Radagon and Marika, tell me more.
So we're going to start now by just basically saying, okay,
You're the one
this
that eats.
is what we're going to be saying in this, and then we'll explain what we mean after that. So this is, I guess it's the topic sentence, if you want. Radagon and Marika, at some point, were two different people. At some point in the reasonably recent past, after the sort of big world-shaping events happened, after that point, they did actually fuse into one being. This has something to do with the way that Marika is related to the Golden Order. It's to do with the Golden Order having all these underlying concepts of which the game is calling regression and causality.
I'm not entirely sure if Radagon and Marika ever were two split different people. I don't like really have anything against it. I just don't think there's anything to explicitly confirm it, and I just kind of stay on the fence until we have more information. So if there's more of a reason to believe that, I'm definitely interested to hear it. All right.
No, this is great. He's gonna have to do all of it again. Hello there. It's From Software president and co-creator of Elden Ring, Hidetaka Miyazaki here. Me and the boys were just pranking Yui by pouring water on his hard drive when I got a note from Sin that says, could you explain the principles of causality and regression? So, causality and regression is when Dark Souls 3 is inexplicably well received, causing Bandai Namco to ask you to please regress away from Sekiro and Derasine and remake Demon Souls for the fourth fucking time. At this point, I was a little concerned that the formula was becoming stale, so I asked to work with another writer. They said yes. I suggested Amano Akira, the author of Kitekyo Hitman Reborn. They said no. In retrospect, that this was the right decision. I had no ideas. I just wanted her to officially canonize my OC, Garbaggio. In the end, I was extremely happy to work with my fifth choice, George R.R. Martin. George came up with a family tree where everyone had the same name. I stole some stuff from 1980s role-playing games, and 12 million people bought it. Sin also...
Yeah, and some people don't know that Miyazaki's from Jersey, and that's how come he had such a close connection with George R.R. Martin, who is based in New York. They met at Comic-Con. It's a long story. I'm sure you guys already know it.
Wants me to say hello to everybody who is new. Everyone who has already stopped listening, I've seen your fucking retention rate.
We start.
Yeah, Sin and Sophie have really good pixel art. I'm jealous. I should probably commission stuff like that. I don't know. I'm kind of lazy about that kind of thing, though.
Start the Radagon Marika story by talking to a giant turtle in a Pope's hat.
Named Muriel.
And he gives us this, like, very sort of basic, like, 101, here's who Radagon is.
Mm-hmm.
So Radagon is one of Queen Marika's basically generals. He just calls him a champion, but he's described as being, like, the commander of this big golden army. And he marries the Queen of Caria, who is called Ranala. Then Queen Marika, her husband at the time, whose name is Godfrey, he is basically kicked out. He's kicked out of the lands between because he loses the gold in his eyes. He becomes the first of the Tarnished. I think he's the first Tarnished ever. There may be, I don't know exactly who was first, but he sounds like he was the first one. He becomes Tarnished. The rest of the Tarnished, along with him, they're all basically exiled because they're no longer, like, the grace of gold is no longer with them. So when that happens, Marika recalls Radagon to her, and they get married.
Right.
And Muriel's like, yeah, that was really weird. Because he's like, I don't...
All right, Wesley DeSouza says, about Marika and Radagon, you just can't believe that they're always the same person, even if in two separate bodies, because the game mentions them in various different contexts and purposes. I understand where you're coming from with that, but I don't necessarily think the game tells us that they were ever in two different spots at the same time. I think that's just kind of an inference one would make. Like, it would be natural for Marika to stay either in Leyndell or accompany Godfrey in his campaign, wherever the hell he went, that for some reason was not Liurnia, you know? And it's possible she could have, like, transformed herself into Radagon maybe after the first part of the campaign against Liurnia, like the war against Liurnia. That was something that we took a little bit of time to double check in my streaming of the 1.0 version of Elden Ring, that the Japanese for like the first war of Liurnia and the second war of Liurnia isn't technically a war, and this is like some really pedantic stuff, but it's essentially like one protracted campaign, or no, sorry, one war that's composed of like two campaigns. So, and this is heavy speculation on my part, of course. I wonder if perhaps Renala was in, or sorry, if Marika was in like the first half of the war, saw Renala be a badass, and was like, you know what? I think I have a plan to, like seduce her and gain her knowledge. But I think that's also kind of a big stretch. All of the stuff with the Liurnian Wars doesn't make a ton of sense with the little information that we have so far, because Radagon must have been in the second half of the war, and it's questionable if he was in the first half of the war, because if he was in the first half of the war, why was there a need for a second one? Wouldn't he and Renala have fallen in love like kind of early on? There's just so many unresolved questions, but I do think that's a very good question to bring up. And Wesley also said they never found a common, consistent thematic buildup with the descriptions throughout the story, in the English descriptions at least. Well, don't you worry, the Japanese isn't much better there. Beans and Rice says, you have yet to become me. I think that's a very interesting quote, and yeah, I don't entirely know what to make of it, because of course she could be speaking literally that Radagon has yet to become Marika, but my personal interpretation of this line here is she's saying Radagon is an Elden Lord, whereas Marika is the god. And I don't think like Radagon was on the level of a god despite like everything. But of course, that is my personal idea about that. And people are very free to disagree. What if Marika had a double like in Star Wars? Yeah. Queen Amygdala from Bloodborne. Hey, Jay Dixon, welcome into the stream, as well as everybody else whose names I did not call out.
Don't quite understand why that happened. Renala was completely heartbroken that her husband was taken from her, and Muriel straight up says, like, I don't understand to this day why Marika wanted to marry Radagon. Because he wasn't that important. He was basically just one of her generals. Muriel calls him a mere champion. He's like, well, why was she happy with him when there's like demigods walking around? Why you marry this guy?
You know why?
Why?
It's just that Marika really hated Renala.
Now we have the explicit confirmation that this one is definitely sin with the eating.
Such a revenge thing, and she stole her boy.
Yes.
Oh my god.
I just realized with all this laughing, we should probably put the subtitles back on. So my mistake for anybody who may have needed that.
Muriel then, if you continue to discuss Radagon with him, he says, yeah, this other weird thing about Radagon is that Radagon was having a big statue of himself made by a sculptor. And Muriel's wording is the sculptor glimpsed the skeleton in Radagon's closet. So Radagon had a secret, but it's not clear at this point what it was. But Radagon had some kind of secret, and it's something to do with this big statue of him that was made.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of like it for a while. This comes back when we finally reach Leyndell, which is the capital city of Lands Between. It's where, like, Marika lived. It's where the Erd Tree is. It's where Radagon lives as well. So we find the big statue of Radagon.
Yeah.
And it does nothing. It's a statue.
Okay, I have a funny joke.
Okay.
Remember Gentleman of Luck?
No.
When they're like, we're gonna meet at the statue. And then the guy's like, okay, but is the statue sitting or standing? And then the second guy replies, it's a statue. Who's gonna make him sit? But in Russian, it
Is
has
that okay, I assume it's very funny in Russian. Hello, Ilana the Squalid Queen here, just laughing along with Sin's very funny Russian joke. You know, jokes like that are the kind of jokes the cable companies don't want you to hear. That's why I launched my new video streaming app, Ilana. Ilana is home to literally dozens of great Soviet comedies, the distribution rights of which are a complete mess. You'll laugh along with Ivan Vasilovich changes his profession, the peculiarities of national fishing, And of course, the Feasts of Belshazzar. Streamed directly from satellite, you can think of Elana as cable TV without the cable.
Okay, Atlanta. These are some quality
You can think of
auto
Elana
captions.
as cable TV without the cable. But hurry, because the servers are going to shut down in about 5 minutes. Oh, they're gone. They're gone. You know, that's what happens when you're too ahead of the curve. The statue on its own does nothing, but there is a miracle we can get, an incantation, that is called the Law of Regression. So the Law of Regression, it's one of the two sort of founding principles of the Golden Order, which is the sort of unifying worldview that is being enforced upon the lands between at the moment. So the idea is the Golden Order has two principles. One is called regression, one is called causality. We will talk about that later on. But as far as all that matters now is Law of Regression. And one of the descriptions of the Law of Regression is it's like, you know, it has all these healing effects, protection cells, blah, blah, blah. And then it says, and it reveals mimicry. What it does is if you use Law of Regression in front of that statue, it shifts to become a statue of Marika. And you get a little note that says, Radagon is Marika. You can then inform the brilliant Goldmask of this. Goldmask is a guy who doesn't do a lot of talking. He just basically stares and points at things, and his fingers apparently move according to Corrin. But basically you can inform Goldmask of this. And Corrin, who becomes he's the guy in Round Table Hold who teaches basic incantations. He kind of becomes like Goldmask's interpreter later on. And after you inform Goldmask of this, Corrin, who's interpreting Goldmask's movements, says, whoa, wait a minute. Like, Radagon is Marika? Look, I don't know what this means. So, when you finally encounter Radagon / Marika, you do it in the Erd Tree. It's the final encounter of the game. So what happens is you walk inside the Erd Tree and you see Queen Marika, and she's crucified on a shard of the Elden Ring. Her body has crumbled and fallen apart like you see in the trailer. Interestingly, she is pierced. She has this huge, spike that is, driven through her body. It's kind of like a Christ pose, I guess, where he's pierced by the spear on the cross. It's very similar to that.
I'm pretty sure this is more of an Evangelion reference right here. But I've also wondered if this is supposed to be part of Destined Death.
Notable that becomes important later on is she doesn't have any gold in her. She just looks like a shattered statue. She breaks from the crucifix thing, rune arc, whatever, and she falls. And she falls behind the dais where you saw the ring being shattered. And then she gets up, but as she is getting up, she physically transforms into Radagon.
Right.
Radagon and her, they are sharing a form.
Yes.
So there is some sort of physical transformation that happens. Her hair changes, her body changes, and she gets up, and now it's Radagon. When you defeat Radagon, Radagon's body collapses, the Elden Ring escapes. That leads to a really fucking terrible boss fight that goes for 7 minutes if you do it properly. But then, when that's over with, what's left behind is Marika's corpse.
Yeah.
So it goes Marika to Radagon and then back to Marika. And what's important about the ending, if you pick one of the fix the Elden Ring endings, is that when you put the head, Marika's body falls to pieces, when you put it back together, the gold comes back to her. The gold was in Radagon, it got out. And then when you put it back together again, the gold goes back into her. So she's sort of repaired. So those are the 5 points of what we're shown in game.
Yeah.
You know, I hadn't really considered the idea of the gold going back into her. Obviously, I do think the Elden Beast and the Elden Ring are tied to the black kind of ooze that constitutes the broken parts of their bodies. But yeah, I think that's a neat observation.
We're going to talk now about the history leading up to this point. The lands between have a very complicated and long history, and what we're playing through in Elden Ring is what the game is calling the Age of the Erd Tree. So a bunch of crap happened before, presumably other things will happen after it, but we're going to start with the beginning of the Age of the Erd Tree. That begins with Marika and Godfrey conquering the giants. So when I say Marika and Godfrey, I mean Marika and Godfrey's like massive sort of barbarian army. Like he united all these people to go, and together they all fought the giants and subdued them. We never hear direct dialogue from Queen Marika, but there are what are called the spoken echoes of Marika. So at certain sites of grace, if you rest there with Melina, she will say, oh yeah, I can sense Marika's words here. Do you want me to recite them to you? On the basis of these little conversations, you can piece together kind of the story of what happened. So Marika says,
Astyanax asks if the black is tied to the Elden Beast and the gold is tied to the Elden Ring and Greater Will, what part is left for Marika and Radagon? I wasn't trying to say like the black is just the Elden Beast, but maybe. I don't really have a good answer for that. I think that's an interesting question. I think just it's questionable to me how much Marika even persists after we become the next Elden Lord. Like we obviously like put her head up back on her body, but does she actually regain her personhood? Should that have been like reserved for Melina or something? I don't really know. That's why I really have like a lot of regrets, I guess. I can't think of the right word about like just how bare bones these endings are. But as I've said time and time again, it's just kind of a tradition for FromSoft at this point to have a little bit dissatisfying endings. Evil Noah, welcome in. This is SinclairLore's video, and she's in the chat right now too. Candles, welcome in. Scowleezy says, we still don't know what being Elden Lord means, especially after our ending with Marika being wrecked. True. And kind of one of the other interesting things about the endings to me is just like how, despite how similar that they are, depending on what mending rune you use, the Erd Tree glows in kind of different ways. So maybe I should pull up some footage of that. Not that I think this is like super important, but I mean, this is about as much of a difference as we can see about any of the endings that aren't Ronnie's or the Frenzied Flames. All right, let me do this one, perhaps. So this, I think, might be the fractured ending. Oh. Thanks, Windows Media Player. That's why I typically use VLC. Alright, so we place the head on the body. The gold comes out of her. The ring appears. I guess it like kind of courses her body. And then from this point, gold appears on the interior of the Erd Tree. Oh, I muted this. That's part of it.
Elden Lord. In our home, across the fog. And of fracture.
So fracture, I guess this is kind of like a somewhat uniform gold. I thought this was Goldmask's originally. And so the like Duskborn, I think the outer trunk is... Oh, wait, no. So this is a lot brighter gold with Goldmasks.
In our home. Look. Hey.
So this one should be Duskborn. I guess I could have just looked at the rings and been like, oh yeah, that's what it is. So the interior glows again. And so this time it's kind of gray on the outside of the trunk. The inside, maybe that's supposed to be the same. It's kind of hard to tell with like all the filters and stuff.
Home, across the fog.
And then Dung Eaters still has gold. But then like the rest of it, it's definitely not gold in the same way. Maybe like the interior is, but that's pretty much all you get from the endings. So, all right, going back to the video.
We commend your deeds. Guidance has delivered ye through ordeal to the place ye stand. Put the giants to the sword and confine the flame atop the mount. Let a new epoch begin. So at this point, even though the age of the Erd Tree hasn't been established, like that's what she means by new epoch, she says, guidance has delivered ye. So they presumably have the guidance of grace is in them. The gold is in them at this point, even though the Erd Tree has not been established as this like dominant thing yet. After all this happens, we get another little Marika speech where she says, I declare mine intent to search the depths of the Golden Order. Through understanding of the proper way our faith, our grace is increased. Those blissful early days of blind belief are long past. So at this point, Marika is saying, like, all right, we've established the epoch of the Erd Tree. It's a new age. The Golden Order is the dominant thing in the world. Now, I am going to try to understand it. That's something we'll come back to later, the notion that the Golden Order, even though people talk about it like it's a sort of a fanatical religion, it's really not. It's something that actively wants to be understood. Like, what the principles of it are a lot more sort of inquisitive and a lot more malleable than you would expect. It's not like a blind faith thing. It's not something that you're just invested in and you believe without questioning it. The Golden Order is something that wants to be understood, it wants to be taken apart, and that's why there are so many characters in Elden Ring that are adherents of the Golden Order, but they all disagree on what they should do. They all disagree on how to fix the Order, what's wrong with the Order. Maybe nothing's wrong with the Order. Maybe the Order needs to change. Lots and lots and lots of different views on that. So, now, some point after that, Godfrey loses his grace. There's two references to the time Godfrey lost his grace, and I'm not sure which comes first. So we firstly have a speech from Marika where she says, My lord and thy warriors, I divest each of thee of thy grace. With thine eyes dimmed ye will be driven from the lands between, ye will wage war in land afar, ye will live and ye will die, and then after thy death I will give back what I once claimed, return to the lands between and brandish the Elden Ring. And that's further elaborated on in like the second reference to this, which is on Godfrey's crown. It's like a list of the things Godfrey accomplished, and it says like, he led war against the giants, he faced the Storm Lord, and then there came a moment when his last worthy enemy fell, that the hue in Godfrey's eyes faded. So I'm assuming that by the hue in his eyes, they mean the gold. And it's interesting that that ties it specifically to his last worthy enemy fell. So it...
Yeah, I kind of agree with that interpretation there as well. Noah asks that yesterday I mentioned how various NPCs lost their grace, and they forgot to ask if there's any explanation as to why. Is it because they lost their own way, so grace was taken away? I don't really know why they lost their grace. Maybe, like, grace in a certain way kind of represents fate for some people, so I don't necessarily think everyone is fated to become the Elden Lord if they follow grace, because with at least Wilhelm and Vargram, their grace led them into conflict with each other, and they were locked in a stalemate in the Round Table Hold, whereas the kind of story that we're first presented from like Vare and a couple of the other figures is that by following grace, this will guide you down the path to becoming Elden Lord, but it doesn't exactly seem to be as true as some people believe, which is a thing that I talk about like in all of their games, how some people have certain ideas about their universes, and then we kind of get information that doesn't exactly align with each character's view of what's going on. So it does show that the characters in these worlds have a bit of flawed perspectives, in my opinion. Wesley asks, is it right to assume that grace is some sort of blessing? If so, Marika and the Greater Will are the ones in control of this, or rather they dispose of the knowledge to see and understand it. So, sort of like, to answer the first part of your question, the term like grace and blessing is a little bit synonymous in Japanese, and we do have the Erd Tree. I always forget what this one talisman is, like the the good one, America's Blessing, the one that like gives you like the stamina, the HP. I can't even think of the Dark Souls counterpart. I'm drawing such a blank right now. But anyway, that one says that it's believed that America gave people their grace. Personally, I think we'll show it. Oh, Erdtree's favor. So it is said that when the age of the Erdtree... Okay, I can just do this. It is said that when the age of the Erdtree began, such blessings were personally bestowed upon their recipients by Queen Marika herself. That's questionable for a lot of reasons, but suffice it to say, it is said gives us room to doubt enough about how like grace is actually given in the lands between. I've wondered whether or not grace being given, I mean, if you ignore like the whole Morgott stuff, if it just means like having a maiden to channel runes into your strength, that could potentially be it. And it's a little bit awkward at times because Godfrey says that the Tarnished was spurned by the grace of gold, yet other things kind of contradict that. Because Melina tells us towards the beginning of the game, or something else does, that the grace comes from the Erdtree, and it's like it's been returned to the Tarnished now, I guess. So Ring of Favor, thank you. That's totally what I was thinking of. SinclairLore says losing grace is actually a reference to Passions. Remember Passions? It was very good daytime TV. No, I don't. When Gideon finds about Grace and Marika's true intent coming up, it turns out she wanted to keep an eternal struggle for the people. I don't necessarily know if that's actually what Marika wanted, as much as it is Gideon's interpretation of her will. And we could probably get into that like another time, but I don't necessarily think the epithet of all-knowing is the best descriptor for Gideon. But, okay, good questions.
It's almost like Marika just waits for him to have basically exhausted his usefulness. He's done everything he can for her, and then she's like, okay, I'm taking your grace away. And she says it in this way that's almost like she's trying to help them in a sense. Like she's saying, like, I want you to fight and die and get stronger and then come back. That's like a question for another day. I think exactly what she was trying to do there. But the point is that, like, Godfrey loses his grace and he leaves. And Godfrey...
Yeah, that annoys me so much. Like the whole idea that Marika could have like mega-minded the idea of taking away grace to return it to like usher in a second age after the Radagon one, potentially. I have no idea. The whole like Tarnished mythos is just a big whodunit in my eyes.
Godfrey is like a very, very important person. Massive like paintings of Godfrey everywhere. He's the father of Godwyn. There's this whole dynasty of like Godfrey, Godwyn, Godfrey, Godric. They don't straight up say it, but he's the father of Morgott. He's the father of Morg, because they're twins. And presumably there's just a ton of other demigods as well that we don't meet that are like of Godfrey's sort of line, because we know it's a fairly long line.
Mm-hmm.
So Godfrey leaves, and the reason I'm highlighting, okay, Godfrey is really important, is because her replacement is Radagon. And like I was talking about when Muriel's describing it, Muriel's a little, like, unsure, because he's like, Radagon wasn't that big a deal. It's odd that he was raised to the level of, like, marrying the literal, like, goddess of the universe. So they get married. This is where, like, the fusion seems to happen, because this is an echo of Marika, and it's an echo of Marika that you hear in her bedroom. So presumably this was, like, when Radagon was called before her, maybe it's their wedding night, something like that, but she says to him, "O Radagon, leal hound of the Golden Order." Leal is just an archaic way of saying loyal. "Thou art yet to become me. Thou art yet to become a god. Let us both be shattered, mine other half."
Alright, just two quick notes. One is I definitely admire the way that Sophie is able to speak eloquently and have their sources ready on hand. Because as you guys can tell from the way that I speak, I use a lot of ums and ahs, and it takes me a while to actually like look through all of my notes to get things in order. So it's pretty crazy to me that it just kind of flows so well when they're speaking off the cuff there. And then Astanex said something that I wanted to address, in that Marika then sends us away after after divesting us of the grace, and then triggers the shattering. When that goes wrong, she has the tarnished return as a backup. You might be simplifying things there, but I wouldn't necessarily fully agree with the way this is currently written, because after Marika divests the Tarnished and Godfrey of their grace, there's still the entire epoch of Radagon returning to Leyndell and the Golden Order thriving until Ronnie eventually kills Godwyn, which would then go on to trigger the Shattering. So there's really a whole other age between those events, I guess. Astanex says they have a question. Radagon gave the Rune of Rebirth to his ex. Was that before or after the Shattering? And do you think the loss of that screwed up rebirths? So this is going to be a very contentious topic, and it's something that's come up quite a bit. Well, maybe not like quite a bit. That's come up a bit since my 1.0 playthrough of Elden Ring, where I came to the very unfortunate realization that the only time we're ever told that Renala received the egg in the rune from Radagon comes from Muriel, which means it's dialogue and then therefore secondhand information. So it is questionable how and when Renala came into possession of the rune, because if Renala was truly gifted that rune by Radagon, it calls into question when the hell Radagon would have been close enough to the Elden Ring and the Order to have taken that rune and not affected anything else. Could it have been like a mending rune that he gained from somebody else, or his own mending rune that he gave to Renala? Is Muriel's story wrong? Is the Rune of the Unborn actually a shard of the Elden Ring that became loose after the Shattering? We have some very unresolved questions, which is very frustrating. And you guys are popping off tonight. It's really hard to keep up. Okay. How dare I question the Turtle Pope? He's a sweet pupper who cannot lie. I don't think Muriel is lying. I just don't think Muriel might not have the full story, because it's very clear he doesn't necessarily know that Radagon is Marika. So it's not like he does have a perfect knowledge or a perfect recollection of having witnessed these kinds of events firsthand, it seems. Hey, thanks, Spaghetti. Nice to see you again. Appreciate that. Teen Sith says, if we take the final boss encounter on its face, the Elden Ring almost literally seems to be housed inside Marika's body. And yeah, I agree with that, and I think that's partially why it's so problematic to place the Rune of Death in the possession of both the Elden Ring and the Gloam-Eyed Queen for that exact reason. But that's kind of going off topic, and we all know how that kind of goes. And Koyamusa says, when Radagon married Renala, he ordered the preceptors to keep secret on family matters, so he always had a theory that Radagon was a plant by Marika to learn about sorcery. I don't necessarily think he was a plant. I think it might have actually been Marika herself at that time. But that's just my perspective, and there is room for interpretation. All right, everybody. We're going to move on here, but thank you for all the wonderful questions and comments, and my apologies if I can't get to all of them.
So, at some point here, Miquella and Melania are born. There's an interesting description of Miquella and Melania. They were chosen to be Empyreans. Empyrean is just the title that is given to the gods that are going to succeed Marika. So the three Empyreans that were shown, it's Miquella, Melania, and Ranni. So the notion that, like, well, if Empyrean, like, you have to be a descendant of blah, 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 you don't, because Ranni's an Empyrean. Ranni is not a blood relation of Marika at all. She is only related to Marika by marriage. She has nothing to do with her. Like, there's none of Marika's blood in her veins. She's the daughter of Radagon and Renala, and she becomes Marika's daughter by marriage, but they're not actually, like, they're not blood relatives. So
I think that is potentially arguable if you think Radagon is Marika. And so that just kind of means that Rani has two moms and a dad. I don't know. It's a little bit strange. But I guess it's not that much stranger than the idea that Mikola and Melania came from both Marika and Radagon if they were supposed to be one person. But I digress. And I think it's also a good point that Sophie brought up that Sophie brought up that Rani and the other Carians became demigods as stepchildren. So maybe there is a little bit of room to more forcibly argue that Radagon could have been a separate being from Marika at this time because of the kind of one-line explicit confirmation that they became demigods after Radagon married Marika. But maybe it gets a bit wishy-washy with the whole idea of the law of causality and regression, and maybe Marika and Radagon's union was a kind of paracausal event where it would go on to retroactively alter the physiology of the Carian children if they fused after the fact. But again, that is some super speculative stuff that has no real grounding in anything, and that's just me trying to reconcile some oddities within the game text.
all it means is this is a god that is powerful enough to basically potentially succeed you. The description of them is we need new gods for new ages. That on its own is very interesting because she's Marika the Eternal. She's not supposed to die, she's not supposed to stop, but they start naming successors to her. And they also specify that those successors, they might usher in a new age. That's after the age of the Earth Tree. The reason I'm talking about this is that the description of Mikola and Melania, it says that they're Empyreans because they're born of one god.
Well, we do know of one god that's made of two people.
Yeah, that's right, what you're saying there, because their parents are Radagon and Marika, and Radagon is Marika. They're the child of one god. The one god that is two people who are fused together.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I want to go back to the little discussion between Marika and Radagon for a second. So she says, "Thou art yet to become a god." So he's not a god yet. And she says that they're both going to be shattered, and she calls him her other half. So, the big question mark over the timeline is, when did Godwin die? I actually don't know. I think you could probably figure it out. But, the whole point is Godwin's death is what leads to the shattering of the Elden Ring.
Sei un sicario immortale dall'aspetto di bambino che cerca di espandere le sue abilità? Non guardare oltre.
Really got me. I'm
La prestigiosa Dignity City University
how did you two
offre
think
una
that I
varietà
spoke
di corsi,
Spanish?
meditazione, trascrizione ed etica. Candidati oggi. Basta andare su glockenspiromancyacademy.com.
Or is this Italian?
G-L-O-C-K
I don't even know.
N-S-P-Y-R-O-M-A-N-C-Y.
I know this is definitely Italian because of the extra sounds after every consonant. Consonanta.
Cosa stai aspettando? Candidati oggi.
Something a little odd about Elden Ring.
Just one thing.
Just one thing. There's one, everything about this game completely makes sense. Just one little niggle. Elden Ring had two very, very flashy CG trailers made.
Yeah.
The second of those ones, it's called the story trailer, and that could easily be the intro to the game. And I'm fairly convinced at some point that was the intro to the game. And also, this story trailer, it came out a couple of months, I think, before the game came out. And it came out on the official Bandai Namco channel. So
Yeah, this came out 2 or 3 months before the game was, I think, maybe originally supposed to be released. And it's really funny to me that this actual cutscene isn't in the game anywhere. So technically, one can make the argument that the story trailer is not canon because it's technically not in the game if they want to be like a super purist about things, which is just hilarious to me. And to get on my boomer soapbox, back in my day, when you had games, they had the cutscenes at the beginning. So I think like if they just included it like with the Elden Ring title page, and if like you just kind of idled on the main screen for a minute or two, I think it would have been really nice if the story trailer played, because that's kind of one of my like earliest memories of like gaming, or like one of my fonder moments of like growing up as a child and playing games is like after you put it in, you would just kind of like let the title screen chill out for a moment, and then you'd like see the extra stuff, and that was just always a treat on the very first playthrough. Attract mode? Okay. Okay, yeah, it is weird that the story trailer's nowhere in the game. I'm assuming Sophie's about to say something along the same lines here.
What I'm establishing here is, like, as far as I am concerned, that story trailer is, like, big air quotes canon. The reason I care about that, because it mentions Godwyn dying, and then Ranni, who is narrating it, she says, Queen Marika was driven to the brink. So Godwyn's death is the catalyst for Marika wanting to break the Elden Ring.
Mm-hmm.
It would be an emotional thing, because Godwyn was her son.
Yeah.
She's lost her son, who she didn't think she would ever lose. That would drive you to the brink.
Yeah.
The other thing is that, like, on a less personal level to that, Godwyn is the first of the demigods to die. Prior to this, no one thinks they can die. So not only is it a personal tragedy for Marika, it's also this, like, oh shit moment. Because suddenly, like, these people who you thought...
The auto captions censored poop. I'm surprised.
shit moment.
Are these auto-generated? Or did you, like, put Radagon yourself? No, this is totally auto-generated. It's so strange. Sorry, it's totally distracting.
Because suddenly, like, these people who you thought were going to be around forever, they can die now. And on an even more abstract kind of cosmic level, the death of Godwyn messes up how death works in the Lands Between. Godwyn is killed with a fragment of the Rune of Death, and he's killed in a specific way where his soul dies but his body doesn't. And that's like this sort of explanation of why Godwyn is rendered as this enormous sort of deformed monstrosity that is inside the Erd Tree. Doesn't really look like doesn't look like anything you see in game.
Yeah.
It actually has a fishtail, which I'm sure we're going to find out the origin of through data mining in like 5 years or something. But point is, like, Godwyn dies in a way that messes up the actual...
So this is a common theory. It's that, like, hold on, let me
mechanic
back up real quick just to show it off.
Out.
That Godwyn's appearance is kind of reminiscent of the Fiji mermaid, which is like obviously a fake. What are they called? Not embalming. Like a fake taxidermy mythical creature, and the whole mythos behind mermaids were that they had no souls and that they would steal them from others depending on the myth you're looking at. So I think that might have been part of the inspiration for Godwyn, but you know, it is always arguable, I suppose. Cryptid? Maybe. No. A Ningyo? Yeah.
The origin of through data mining in like 5 years or something, but point is, like, Godwyn dies in a way that messes up the actual mechanics of death, because he's not entirely dead. His soul died, but his body lingers on as a sort of enormous hunk of, like, rotting meat that is stuck in the Erd Tree that won't die. And when you go see him, like, there's flies everywhere. Because, like, even though he died an age ago, his body is still technically alive. He's like a zombie. He's like a giant hunk of meat that is just rotting and rotting and rotting but won't actually die. And this is what leads to, and this is a whole other discussion that, like, we'll get to some other time, but it leads to the creation of what's called those who live in death.
So one of the weirder things about like the flies on the death route is that they kind of seem to actually come out of the death root, and it's a little bit unclear there, but if you zoom in on Godwin and even Roger when he's afflicted by the death blight in the Round Table Hold, you can see wings coming out of the tendrils on their Deathroot models. Wait, what? Did I misspell Godwin? I think I used an I instead of a W, or an I instead of a Y. Alright. Hopefully this one will work. Oh no, I think this is too far away. Well, you can kind of see like the wings coming out right there. Let me do this one. Nope. Well, this might be a better angle. So you can see some wings coming out here. I really thought I had a better angle of that. Maybe... Oh well. I know we showed it off on my 1.0 playthrough, but you can kind of see it. I just wish it was a little bit better.
Because it creates this situation where, like, well, okay, things don't have to be alive or dead anymore. They can be both. Godwin can be alive and dead. Golden Order does not like this. And there's actually a little reference later on to, like, the actual interaction between the Golden Order and Destined Death is a lot more complex than you'd think. Because it actually says, like, Death was sort of the shadow of the Golden Order that was plucked from it. So they're actually related. And what happened to Godwin, like, it sort of revealed this, like, contradiction within the Golden Order that it has trouble grappling with.
And so that could be a very good hint as to the nature of the DLC. The shadow of the Erd Tree comes from, like, Destined Death, perhaps. And we do know that the Rune of Death did become transmogrified into Deathroot in Godwin's corpse after the Shattering and whatnot. That's an official use of the word shadow? Yeah, exactly, Foster. So I don't think I quite put it together that way until now. So Sophie just gave me the brain juice I needed to get there. Scaleezy asks, so the undead have either body and soul be dead, right? Which one do the regenerating skeletons have? So, I guess I should have said brain fluid, right, Sinclair? But anyway, going back to Scaleezy's question. So those who live in death don't seem to need bodies. The issue is that those who live in death are spirits. And this took me a long time to figure out because I was like, wait, Godwin is soulless. So shouldn't those who live in death be soulless? Is it just like their reanimated bodies that are like zombies? The reason why I came to the conclusion that it must be the opposite case is that we have spirit ashes for those who live in death with the skeletons. And, I mean, they're all skeletons, aren't they? I was thinking of the skeleton bandits, and then there's like the other groups of skeletons, but I can't remember the individual ones. But anyway, the souls get, in my mind, infected by the will of Godwin that gets left within his body, because I think he still technically has his grace, his gold. It's just that he doesn't have a soul anymore, so his remaining willpower infects everybody else. And if a soul comes into possession of willpower, it kind of becomes alive again, I think. But maybe we're wrong. Who knows? Or me. Disillusioned Dork, thank you again for another £5. Personally, you do feel bad for those who live in death, but in order to safeguard natural life, Deathroot must be sealed away or destroyed. It's a curse. Yeah, I think it is definitely a curse. And I do think it's kind of analogous to Hallowing, where things will eventually lose their minds. But I don't even know if like the Golden Order is like okay or good even before Destined Death screwed things up with Godwin's body and Deathroot. So yeah. Once again, thank you for the £5. I appreciate that.
The point is, like, Marika, who's made it her mission, essentially, to understand the Golden Order. She's now in a position where the Golden Order is starting to not work properly. And that, I think, is why she breaks the ring. It's a combination of, it's grief, but it's also like, I don't know what's happening anymore. I have to take this thing apart and understand it.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel. And I think that helps characterize the line in the story trailer, which Sophie was talking about a moment ago, where it says Marika was driven to the brink.
So,
also, Crunchy, welcome back to the stream. If anybody is unfamiliar with Crunchy, he's also a content creator, and we'll probably get to one of his videos pretty shortly as well. He says, if you hit Godwin, Rancor spirits come out of him. If you kill those who live in death, they revive because blue spirit things like Rancor swirl around back into their bodies. So, I don't think I've actually really tried to hit Godwin to see the Rancor spirits, but that's a good observation. I'll need to do that sometime. Thank you.
So this leads into the way in which characters relate to the Golden Order. Something about the Golden Order that I kind of like signposted earlier is that, yes, the Golden Order is like, it's a religion. It's got clerics attending to it. It's got people trying to interpret its meaning. It has these old women who interpret the words of the fingers. It has like people like D, who are like fanatical followers of the Golden Order, who are like killing everything that doesn't agree with it. Despite all of this, at the heart of the Golden Order is the concept of understanding the Golden Order. It's not something that you just believe in. It's actually a set of principles and ideas that are open to being interrogated, and they're open to being seen in different ways. I mentioned this earlier, but you have, for instance, like, you have D, you have Rogier, you have Goldmask, you have Corin, and you have Fear. And they're all interacting with the Golden Order in different ways. Fear's opposed to it, because she's one of the deathbed characters. She's, like, obsessed with those who live in death. But, like, you have Rogier. Rogier is very interested in how death works. He deliberately infects himself with death. He has a really interesting mechanic, they've never done this before, where you literally get to see Rogier's bloodstain as if he's a player, and he deliberately went down to where one of the Godwin effigy face things was, and got killed by it, so that he could better understand death. And he actually says, like, I did this deliberately.
I don't think he says he did it deliberately. I think it's the opposite, that it was an accident. I should double check his dialogue, but that's not too important. I was just going to say, the first time I came down here and saw his bloodstain and his body just fly into the sky, that scared the hell out of me, because I didn't know what Deathroot was at the time. And I was like, what enemy did that, you know? So, yeah, I'll try to look up the dialogue when he talks about this as we continue watching real quick.
So that he could better understand death. And he actually says, like, I did this deliberately. Like, now that I'm suffused with death, I can understand death better. You have, like, Goldmask, who, when he learns Radagon is Marika, his response is to try to, like, synthesize an explanation for it. You have D, who just straight up, like, he's a fanatic. But he's fanatical in this interesting way, where they talk about, like, the depths of the Golden Order are all about learning. So all these characters, they're trying to learn and learn and learn about the Golden Order. Gideon Ofnir is another example. Will just learn and learn and learn. And the fanatics of...
Wait, Teen Sith said you saw him get blighted in real time, so there's an event flag for it? I will need to look into that, because as far as I knew, there wasn't. But then again, I also haven't looked into that specifically too deeply. I just thought the event flag would have been that the corpse puddle appears. That's crazy if that's true, though.
Of the Golden Order are the people who have basically learned enough to say, like, okay, now I know everything, and I'm going to stamp out everything that doesn't fit with what I know. But at the same time, you have characters who studied the Golden Order, and they say, well, the Golden Order is actually very malleable. Contradictory ideas can actually be worked into the Golden Order. maybe the idea of those who live in death could become part of the Golden Order one day. Like, if we sort of just reshape how we think of it. Very interestingly, Enya, the old lady at Round Table who talks to the Fingers, she is sort of like, she serves the Fingers who serve the Order, but she's very, very aware that the Fingers and the Order, there's something that has to be interpreted by people. And it's all right to make your own decisions. There is a point at the end of the game where you're in a position where you're asked to burn down the Erd Tree. And Enya says to you, I'm paraphrasing, but she says, like, well, burning down the Erd Tree is terrible. You shouldn't do it, but if we wait for an answer from the greater will through the Fingers, it might take years and years and years. Like, the Fingers are going to be communing with the will for so long that we may not have a chance, like, to fix things before they get an answer. And she says, like, sometimes you have to commit a sin. Like, maybe the world's been this way for too long. Maybe it's time to end it. And that's coming from someone whose literal job it is. Her sole purpose in life is to interpret the words of the Fingers. So it's like, oh, all right. So there's all this stuff in there about the Golden Order is actually, it's amenable to changes. It's like real religions do this. Where, scripture is reinterpreted and new ideas are sort of synthesized into it. Yeah, so going back to Marika, like, when Marika says, I'm going to search the depths of the Golden Order, like, that's kind of what the Golden Order seems to want.
So, as far as I know, is Teen Sith is saying, I think Roger does go to the Round Table Hold if you kill Godric. Although, I can't remember what the events were in my 1.0 playthrough, but I think I screwed up that order of events. So I don't exactly know his triggers off the top of my head, unfortunately. Now, what was Sophie just saying? I can't remember. But as far as I can see on Roger's dialogue, he doesn't say that he did it deliberately. But there might be more that I just haven't, glimpsed over right now. Actually, maybe this will be good enough. As far as... Damn it. Where was it? Okay, it was around here. He said mishap. I should just look in mishap. Okay. Pleased to meet you. Name's Roger, a sorcerer by trade, but now I'm in this sorry state. I had a little mishap, and now I can't move. As you might guess, it's far from ideal. And of course, this seems like his first time talking to you if you skipped him in Stormvale. So, as far as I know, he doesn't contradict this if you talk to him elsewhere first. So he calls it a mishap here, and of course he could just be, humble because he doesn't want to reveal, exactly what happened, because Deathroot is a big taboo in the Lands Between, I guess. But yeah. Thanks, Disillusioned Dork. Alright, going back to the video.
It seems to want, you have to understand the Golden Order. And there's all this talk, like I mentioned, of the principles of the Golden Order. You have, regression and causality. Those are the two principles. And this is something that I think might become clearer when we get a fuller Japanese, translation. And regression is the idea that, everything is sort of being pulled toward one point. And causality is the idea that everything is connected.
Good news. There is no good news. The Japanese really isn't that much clearer. My condolences.
And you sort of have to operate within those two principles, but there's room to sort of change how you view the world within those two principles. Hi, Sophie here. As a qualified teacher who has to teach very, very long classes, or did before COVID happened, patreon.com. I'm here to remind you all that we're halfway through today's episode, so for health and safety reasons, you should all stretch and stay hydrated. So while we're all guarding ourselves against...
And you guys give me crap about Nightbot. Just wait until we incorporate SophieBot.
horrible lower back pain, I'm going to talk about something that I noticed in between us recording this episode and me recording this. And that is that when Radagon does his little shockwave smash thing with the hammer, you see a design that looks like a hand. The sort of point of impact is like it's a circular thing that represents the Golden Order, and there's these 5 radiating lines that come out. And I think that may represent like the Golden Order in the center, and that it's reaching out. It's branching out. It's branching out in the form of 2 fingers and 3 fingers. And as the fingers are the means by which the Golden Order communicates with the lands between, that sort of makes sense, I guess. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say. Not a particularly deep or profound insight, but had to be something to talk about while everyone looked after their posture. What other podcasts care about your posture like this? Probably, actually, quite a lot, because they all sold those mattresses. But that they were being paid to say that we just care about you. Hi to everyone who's new. So, Marika's whole, like, understanding the Golden Order thing, that in itself doesn't seem to be heretical. It's not like she's like, I'm going to reveal the charade behind the Golden Order. It's not like, the Golden Order is all mysticism, but I'm going to, like, show you how it really works. The Golden Order is open about the fact it's not mysticism. It's open about the fact that it can be understood, and it is a series of principles by which you live, by which you understand the world. This is getting into a whole discussion about, like, the Golden Order as a kind of colonizing force. Because the Golden Order, like, it sent the Elden Ring from the sky. It sent it in the form of a star. And, like, again, it's all described in very mythic terms, but essentially Marika seems to have found or been possessed by that star, and that is what led to the world we have now. So, the Golden Order, it came from outside, and it came to a place that the Golden Order wasn't dominant in and was actually run by giants. And there were like astrologers who studied the stars. There was no Erd Tree, and then that took over.
Urge Tree is a new one, but I think Sophie is misspeaking here, and instead of saying like it was the Golden Order that came, I think she meant to say like the Greater Will, just to keep everybody on the same page here. Yeah, I might be mixing up GO and GW.
We talked about this a little on the Scarlet Rod episode, but it's basically like it's a weed. It like landed in this world and started to take it over. And it's a colonizing force. Like, it is conquering and colonizing these worlds. And I think that is what they're getting at in the fight with the Elden Beast. Because you see in the distance all of these other Erd trees. And I think the implication there is supposed to be that these are all other worlds that the Golden Order has landed an Erd tree on and taken it over.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you're a colonizing force and you want to retain control, it helps to be malleable. It helps to be something that, like, can change itself to fit in with the people that you're colonizing, to fit in with the people that you're in control of. It's not going to work the same everywhere. So this all seems to be reasonable, like within what the Golden Order wants. Like, Marika wants to understand it. So it's like, all right, as long as the Golden Order remains in control, it doesn't matter if you kind of bend it a little bit. Where things go absolutely wrong is when she breaks the ring. When the ring actually breaks and the shattering happens, that's when the Greater Will pisses off.
Uh-oh.
It's the war between the demigods. There's a description. So it says here, now, the current imperfection of the Golden Order, or, and this is important, or instability of ideology, can be blamed upon the fickleness of the gods. That is the fly in the ointment. So, the Golden Order is imperfect, and it's imperfect and broken because of what the gods did. Right, so we know that much. It's not to do with understanding it, it's because the gods started squabbling over fragments of the ring. But what's really important is they say it's imperfect because the ideology of the Golden Order is now unstable. And if you look at all the demigods that are fighting, they all actually have a slightly different take on the Golden Order. So you have...
So, we looked into this the other night, and I'm terrible at remembering what comes from where. I think... Was this Garrulous Goldmask's? Yeah, I think this was Garrulous Goldmask's video, where they asserted that that line was a little bit mistranslated. I kind of don't really think it's that mistranslated, but I kind of understand where they're coming from. Where rather than saying it was a flaw of ideology, it was more like the gods had fickle viewpoints. So fundamentally, they're very, very similar, but there's a slight nuance in that maybe because Marika saw Deathroot as a bad thing, she felt forced to shatter the Elden Ring when she may not have ultimately needed to. And I think that might be kind of what's alluded to in that description. But it's also a very unclear description. So that's very arguable, I think.
Have like Rykard, who just wants to get stronger and stronger and consume everything, but then you've got Mikola, who turns his back on the Golden Order because it can't treat Melania, and you have Melania, who is afflicted with the Scarlet Rot, and you have like Radagon, who is... I think Radagon might actually be trying to fix things. Like, there's this question about why is he stopping the stars again? And I honestly think he might be stopping the stars because when the stars start again, that's actually what allows Rani to like get access to Nokron and begin the Age of the Stars.
So we kind of mentioned this yesterday in another video, but in my opinion, I don't believe the inception of the Golden Order happened fully until Radagon returned to Leyndell and became the second Elden Lord. And that would mean that the Carian children should have existed in a world where Destined Death was still a metaphysical force. And so perhaps Radahn felt the need to halt the stars to give a form of immortality to the Carians that would have predated the immortality of the Golden Order. And there might be more to the story we don't know. I think what I just said there is a little bit reductive and could potentially like obscure some of his connections to Rani and Rykard a bit. So putting that aside, I do think it's also possible, as Sophie is insinuating here, that Radahn could have been working on behalf of the Carians to potentially allow Rani to successfully kill Godwyn with the Rune of Death and or herself without her soul being destroyed by the Rune of Death. But unfortunately, Radahn's wits have been more or less erased by the Scarlet Rot. So I don't really know what to make of that situation, but at the very least, there is the one portrait of him still hanging in Volcano Manor, so perhaps he and Rykard were close, and it is implied that Rykard and Rani were close by the way she gifted him the Blasphemous Claw, so that way he could potentially forestall Malekith coming after Rani or the Carians or whatnot once she stole the fragment of the Rune of Death. Teen Sith thinks Radahn did it for spite-based reasons. You wrote 5,000 words about it. Yeah, and if anybody is curious about some of our community members' posts, we do have a tab in my Discord where we've kind of collected those kinds of things. So for anybody who wants to read what Teen Sith wrote, as well as a couple of the other members of the Discord, feel free to join. Yeah, and as Dr. N says, you think Radahn was more on the side of the Golden Order than he was of the Carians. It is very questionable, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I kind of like overlooked it for a moment. Because Radahn was a very big fanboy of Godfrey and all that. It is questionable how much he supported the current status quo of the time, I guess, is one way we could say it. Here we go.
So, if Radahn had kept the stars from moving the whole time, the Age of the Stars wouldn't happen.
Mhm.
So I think that might be why he's holding them back. He's just trying to keep things roughly where they are. So, One more little point about like becoming one with things and the perfection of the order is that there is an echo of Marika at the bottom of the lift of Dectus, and it says, "The Erd Tree governs all. The choice is thine. Become one with the order or divest thyself of it. To wallow at the fringes a powerless upstart." So this seems to be getting back to the whole tarnished thing. You can either fully embrace and become one with the Golden Order, or if you don't want to be part of the Golden Order, fine, but you're just going to be on the fringe somewhere, you'll have no power, you'll be nothing. This notion of becoming one with the Order and then like making something of yourself, that's also echoed in another thing that Marika says. This seems to be like before the Shattering war begins. This seems to be when she gives fragments of the ring to the demigods, but before they start fighting. And she says, "Hear me, demigods, my children beloved. Make of thyselves that which ye desire. Be it a lord, be it a god, but should ye fail to be aught at all, ye will be forsaken, amounting only to sacrifices." So I think that is her basically giving shards of the ring to the demigods and saying, like, become powerful, become something new. I don't think she knew the Shattering was going to happen, but it kind of inevitably did. The Shattering being the war. So it looks like what happened was she broke the ring. She gave the fragments of the ring to the demigods without realizing they were going to fight each other. They started fighting each other, and that's when the Greater Will was like, okay, well, I'm out of here. I'm not protecting you anymore.
I'm not so sure about that timeline of events. Not that I think there's anything to directly contradict it. I just don't know if Marika gave the shards to her children directly. And part of my reason for that is, if we do consider the story trailer canon, I think that would just kind of contradict the idea that Marika was driven to the brink or driven mad, perhaps. I think they say in even earlier drafts of that kind of story trailer format. But I digress. Disillusioned Dork said, "Any idea why Ronnie chose Godwin specifically to bear the soul half of the Death Rune? They don't seem to cross paths other than the Night of the Black Knives." So, unfortunately, we really don't have a good insight as to Ronnie's motivations during the Night of the Black Knives. There is a potential for collusion between herself and Marika, and perhaps Ronnie's goal was to originally remove the Two Fingers' control over her as an Empyrean so she could become her own truly independent god, which could have warranted a direct blessing from Marika. And then perhaps Godwin decided to stop her for whatever reason, or maybe he was just a victim of circumstance and was collateral damage. Unfortunately, we don't know, and I wish there was a better tie-in between the symbolism or imagery of the eclipse to give us a better glimpse as to what could have happened, because Godwin is kind of represented by the sun, with the whole Eclipse Hotel referring to him that way. His fiefdom may have been controlling over Castle Sol, perhaps, but we don't really know for sure. And then with Ronnie being the Dark Moon, I've wondered whether or not, obviously, the Dark Moon could be a reference to a moon during the eclipse, because it is going to appear black or dark as it covers the sun. But, right. Okay.
So they're instructions unclear, started a war.
Basically, yeah. Talking about this in chronological terms, they get the shards of the ring, then the war happens. So the war wasn't necessarily a foregone conclusion when they got the shards of the ring. And it seems to, again, be kind of Marika's fault, because she basically says, become as powerful as you can, so of course they start fighting.
Yeah.
So, having established all of that junk, I want to quickly talk about the way that the game is obsessed with twins, and the idea of people either being twins or having two identities, or being two people who are one person or something like that. That's what I mean about Radagon and Marika being one. It's not actually that out of keeping with everything we've seen. So a lot of characters in Elden Ring actually have two identities. When we meet Rani, she calls herself Rena. She reveals herself to be Rani later, but she's Rani's ghost in a doll of Rena. So she's kind of two people. We actually find Rani's real deal corpse later on, and
Yeah.
it doesn't look anything like the doll.
No.
So Rani, like Radagon Marika, she's two people who's one person. She's Rani, she's Rena, but she's Rani. Another example would be Godfrey. When we meet Godfrey, he is the guy we know from the stories and the paintings, big guy with the lion on his back. Godfrey turns out to really be Hoaraloo. There's also a lot of incidents of characters just being twins, like having a twin. So Morgoth and Morg, they're twins. Yeah. Mikola and Melania are twins. There's the twin maiden husks. There's no real reason logically for them to be twins, but they give you twin maiden husks anyway. You have the two fingers, they're a pair. They're the rational ones. The good ones are the two fingers. The bad ones are the three fingers because you can't make a pair out of three. You have these incidents of people being bonded, being pair bonded, to people who aren't necessarily related to them, but there is a bond. So you have Rani is bonded to Blythe. Yes, she also has E.G. and Celavis, but she specifies Blythe was given to her. He's her hound who was given to her. You have Marika herself. She's also kind of bonded to Malekith. Malekith is her hound. He's her wolf. There's also a bunch of just twinned bosses, which is also it's a Souls thing. But in this, you've got the Godskin duo. You have the Omen twins. You have twin examples of all sorts of things in this game. And the most overt one is D. So D is interesting because, Sin, do you know why he goes by D?
Because he's modeled after Vampire Hunter D?
Correct. But in the universe of Elden Ring, where Vampire Hunter D hasn't been invented yet, do you know why he goes by D?
Does it have something to do with Miyazaki's favorite anime?
Reborn.
D? Dying Will Bullet?
Hi to everyone who's new.
Late at night, I think of you, your vision floods my mind.
He's called D because he's actually two people and their names start with D. I think one is Darin and the other is Darren or something like that. Devin. The point is D is called D because D is two people. And D being two people, it's something that's really overt in the armor because literally the armor is two people fused together. But once you get the armor and you get the sword, you get a fuller kind of story of what D is. And it says, the two known as D, so again, D is not one person, D is two people, are inseparable twins. They are of two bodies and two minds, but one soul. Not once do they stand together, not one word do they speak to one another.
Mm-hmm.
So, specifically, two bodies, two minds, one soul. They're joined together. They're two people, but they're one person. And then we find out, later on, if we finish their quest line, it says, the inseparable twins found solace in the Golden Order, the only institution not to revile them. So, the Golden Order, very accepting of them because they are two people who are one. The Golden Order is all about, things being sort of, opposed, but also together, things being drawn together and pushed apart and connected.
Mm-hmm.
So, just to give a little bit of context about this, on my stream of Elden Ring 1.0, I had been mentioning how the idea of the D twins possessing two minds, yet only one soul, was kind of problematic to me for a while, because it seemed, with everything else in the game, that the idea of the soul should be more correlated to the mind, but this kind of armor set contradicted that. Fortunately, Crunchy was in the chat and suggested that I look back at the Japanese of it, and when I did, I noticed that there was a bit of a discrepancy, and this isn't necessarily speaking to what Sophie is saying here, but this just kind of helped recontextualize things for me, and my understanding of the game is that rather than saying that... Actually, let's back up real quick. Rather than saying that they have two bodies and two minds and one soul, the Japanese says they have two bodies, two wills, but one soul. So this kind of goes back into my greater ideas of the willpower being more directly related to runes, and the body, as in the case of Godwin, and the soul being related to the mind. And to just give like a bit of extra context with the whole will and memory thing being related to gold specifically, and I think souls being more related to the idea of like higher order thought, the scarlet rot also causes people to lose their memories. So I think the way we need to use Mikola's unalloyed gold needle, which is potentially infused with a crap ton of willpower to kind of overpower the scarlet rot, would suggest that grace and memories are tied together, which isn't going to be that big of a surprise, I think, because we get remembrances, and remembrances are tied to runes. And this was just kind of very misleading to me for quite a long while. So credit goes to Crunchy for like pointing me down this path, and I just wanted to bring that up. And to go back into the broader topic of Sophie talking about twins, one thing that I did want to bring up is there might be another aspect of two people becoming one person or de facto twins with the way it seems we can graft souls into each other. So the two biggest examples of that are obviously going to be Shabriri and Yura, as well as Arena and Hayata. And this isn't necessarily limited to followers of the Frenzied Flame being able to do that, because within Godwin himself, we kind of have a pseudo second person with the Leech Dragon Fortisax. And going back to the Tarnished, you might even be able to argue that our ability to carry Melina with us is potentially similar to that. Not that she ever seems to like take control of our body, but it is questionable how she does come to inhabit us, kind of the same way that Latenna can do to us. And I think there's another example of that, but I can't think of it off the top of my head right now. But that is something that I wanted to mention in relation to two people and one soul. Of course, there is the Cut Asimi questline, and I'm certain we will definitely be talking about that much more as we move on to Kosmos' video next, and the Hollowed Madman's video after that. So potentially two more videos to kind of go through these topics. Two become one has been a well-known theme since Kingdom Hearts 2. When you say two become one, I think of the Spice Girls song. But anyway. Melina definitely also speaks a bit in the Mine Other Self way to us, true. Yeah, Godfrey and Sarash, that's another one. And that was the one that, like, seeing the cutscene of Godfrey like made me think of this when we were watching this video. So thanks for bringing that one up. Yeah, that one is a lot more explicit. And it's really weird how Sarash can also take on a physical form. And I've wondered whether or not Godfrey was waiting for an opportunity for Sarash to do that, for him to just kill it to free himself of the potential greater will's influence. But I don't really know.
People, but they're one person. And then we find out later on, if we finish their quest line, it says, the inseparable twins found solace in the Golden Order, the only institution not to revile them. So, the Golden Order, very accepting of them because they are two people who are one. The Golden Order is all about, like, things being sort of, like, opposed but also together, things being drawn together and pushed apart and connected.
Mm-hmm. So, Sophie, with all of that in mind, let me tell you about Marika's hammer. The hammer tells us that it's a stone hammer made in the lands of the Newman, outside of the lands
Newman.
between. The tool with which Queen Marika shattered the Elden Ring and Radagon attempted to repair it. The hammer partially broke upon shattering the ring, becoming splintered with rune fragments. Splinter!
Alright, so I think it's really important that we understand that when Marika broke the ring, she was already one with Radagon. That's why I went through the whole timeline thing with like when Godwin died, when the Shattering happened, etc. Because my initial thought when I saw that was, oh, okay, Marika broke the ring, and then she went, oh shit. And then she is, Radagon. And Radagon showed up to try to fix it. And that's the genesis of the fusion, but the fusion happens before that. So that's why I wanted to establish early on that there was this timeline about exactly when the ring was shattered, when they got married, when Godwin died, etc. Because they were already fused when the ring was shattered. It's not a case of like Marika broke the ring and then basically needed Radagon to plug the holes in it. It's that they were already together when the ring broke. So when you talk about like Marika's breaking the ring, Radagon's repairing the ring, that's probably happening at the same time.
Like in that trailer we saw in
Like in the trailer,
2019.
yeah. It's literally the scenario we see in the trailer where she's like, smash, and then it cuts back to Radagon, and he's like, ooh dear, put it back together again. Nope, smash it. Oh, put it back together again. And that seems to kind of be like very in line with the Golden Order. There's like two principles, and everything is kind of connected and pulling together, but it's also like maybe going apart, and there's all this sort of like instability. So you can keep everything kind of stable if you're simultaneously breaking and repairing it.
That's an interesting perspective I haven't considered before. My initial impression of that cutscene and story was that Marika was breaking the Elden Ring because her order was flawed, but Radagon vehemently disagreed with Marika, and as the actual physical embodiment and avatar of the Golden Order, he knew that breaking the Elden Ring might break himself and or his order, and so he felt forced to repair what had already been broken, but the cat was already out of the bag. So to me, it always seemed like two people fighting for possession over the Xbox controller, you know? And so when we do come into the Erd Tree, we see that it's Marika being punished and not Radagon. So it seems to me, or like, if the two were working more in unison, I almost would have expected a more half and half look at the characters. So like maybe one half is Marika, one half is Radagon, rather than, okay, we need to stop punishing Marika for a moment for Radagon to get rid of this challenger to their Golden Order. But that's just kind of my perspective on things there. It's the highest collateral damage divorce ever. Maybe. It's always an Xbox controller. Of course it is. Sinclair says, yeah, and in the cutscene, she seems relieved that it broke, and he goes down on his knees. Yeah, that's kind of how I feel, that he was like, oh man, if that was any closer, that could have been worse. But yeah.
I think that's a big part of it. But I want to finish up by talking about like the notion of like where the Golden Order is at this point, where the ring is. So, something that Muriel brought up that I want to go back to is when he's like, why did she marry Radagon? He's not that important. So, going back to the pillow talk, she says to him like, you are the hound of the Golden Order, you are loyal. She's ordering him to do it. She's not saying like, dear husband, I have a plan. What if we both fuse together? She's just saying like, you are my hound, you do what I say. We're going to fuse together and we're going to break the ring. And if you look across Marika's history, Lord, does she do that a lot. Like, she fucks over Malekith, she fucks over Hugh. The reason I brought up Godfrey earlier, she seems to fuck over Godfrey. She seems to be the one that tarnishes him. She's like, I'm going to take your grace away, just piss off now. At the moment, she seems terrible. It's possible there'll be some other reading of her later on where maybe she wasn't as bad, but from what we've seen, like, she's just betraying and using everyone constantly. And that...
So obviously I disagree with this interpretation, and the way that I kind of look at the dichotomy of Marika and Radagon is kind of analogous to the dichotomy between the Tarnished and Melina. So I think whoever has control of the Xbox controller can hear the other person talking to them, and they might be able to wrest control away from each other, unlike Melina, it seems. So with Marika talking down to Radagon, I think this was right before the Shattering as well, and that she's saying, hey, your smart idea wasn't that smart after all, dumbass. So we need to fix things, and you need to know your place. I'm the one in control here. So then she goes on to shatter it, and Radagon's like, oh, hell no, you don't. I'm going to fix it. And that's kind of how I read it. But again, this is more of a civil disagreement. I do think there is room available for differing interpretations. Crunchy asks, why is Marika's body still there after Radagon's body gets turned into a sword? That's another good question, and that might have to tie into the difference between the Elden Lord and a god. But for whatever reason, Marika's body does disappear after Ranni grabs her, so maybe it just has to deal with Marika being the vessel of the Elden Ring, but the Elden Ring itself kind of gets temporarily destroyed after the Tarnished defeats the Elden Beast, perhaps. But that's a really good question. Beans and Rice says, Tarnished archaeologist claims Marika is kind of a slave of the Elden Beast, so she may have shattered the Elden Ring to free herself. I do think that is a possible interpretation, and I do think if you go with that interpretation, it could potentially mesh well with the idea of Marika giving Ranni her blessing to go on her 1,000-year voyage, essentially.
That, I think, is why she picks the guy who is not that important, the guy who is just her slave, who is just like her general who'll do what she tells him, because she's like, you're going to be my other half, the Golden Order's going to go into you, and we're going to do this thing, and you don't get a say in the matter. Right down to, like, he doesn't appear to want to leave Rennala. Like, Rennala's heartbroken. Rennala never recovers from him leaving. And it all seems to come down to, like, Radagon just can't say no. Because it's either like this, it's either a misplaced loyalty or maybe she has some kind of control over him.
Mm-hmm.
Which would kind of tie in with him being a giant, because Marika, like, placed a curse on the giants, so it may have carried on to Radagon, and she's like, okay, well, like, you do what I say.
Mm-hmm.
Again, going back to this thing here where she says, like, the Erdtree governs all, the choice is thine, become one with the order or divest thyself of it. I think the notion of choice there is interesting because, like, Godfrey is divested of his grace, presumably, like, Marika took it from him. And Godfrey / Horaloo, he's a very independently minded guy, like, from what
There is another quote where she asks all of her comrades, why must they falter? And I've kind of assumed that must have been maybe right before she started divesting people of their grace. So since Sophie hasn't brought this up, in Marika's own words, I declare mine intent to search the depths of the Golden Order. Through understanding of the proper way our faith, our grace is increased. Those blissful early days of blind belief are long past. My comrades, why must ye falter? So they've mentioned the other stuff, but not this line, which I think is kind of important to help contextualize everything else that's going on. So there was definitely a reason why she's saying, like, pick a side or get thee gone.
we see of him. He's not really in Marika's thrall, he just wants to fight stuff. Like, when you talk to him, all he really cares about is, like, he's a character who doesn't see authority as coming from, like, anything other than power. He respects a crown because a crown is something you have to fight for. So he is someone who I think, like, maybe would not go along with Marika's plans as readily as Radagon would. Radagon, in contrast, basically, like, he does what he's told. Like, Godfrey is not a hound. Godfrey is Horaloo. Godfrey is like Conan the Barbarian. He goes out, he fights and fights and fights, and he just wants to get stronger.
The true Goku of Elden Ring, apparently. But yeah, no, that just kind of goes back into what who just said it right here? Wesley was saying, where they agree that Radagon is portrayed more as a tool rather than a person with their own, like, purpose. They just kind of seem to be an extension of the Golden Order / Greater Will, question marks, desires here. and or their own like self-serving bias for the Golden Order. And as I've mentioned before, in the Japanese, the Radagon of the Golden Order title plate for the boss fight is slightly different, and it's more like Radagon the Golden Order. So, or you might be able to like reverse that, where it's like it's synonymous. Sorry, let me rephrase that. Radagon is synonymous with the Golden Order on his Japanese title plates, and that's something that's kind of difficult to keep consistent in English. But perhaps if it was just like the Golden Order, comma Radagon, that could have worked. But I mean, that's not terribly important. But I think it's just kind of a good context here to know about.
Again, I think it's important when you encounter Godfrey in the game, he is not guarding the Erd Tree. I know he might seem like he's, but he's not. He's just there. He's there and he's eulogizing Morgoth, who is probably his son. And you walk in on him when he's cradling Morgoth, and he basically says, like, I'm back to get what's mine, meaning the grace from within the Elden Ring. And the reason he fights you is because he wants to prove that he is the strongest. He wants to prove he is the best, prove he is worthy of being Elden Lord by beating up everybody else. Radagon's not like that. Radagon is literally called Radagon of the Golden Order because he is just doing what the Golden Order tells him.
So could have Marika kicked out Godfrey because he didn't want to fuse?
I think that may actually be it. That, like, Godfrey was too independently minded. Because she says, the choice is thine, become one with the Order or divest thyself of it. Godfrey was divested of it. Radagon becomes one with it to the point where, like, when you encounter Radagon, Marika does not have the Elden Ring in her. She is like an empty husk. She breaks apart, falls down, Radagon gets up, and as Radagon's getting up, the Elden Ring appears inside of him. So he has it, she doesn't. But then when you defeat the Elden Beast and you put Marika's body back together, she gets the ring back in her. So something about the Order went into Radagon. That's why he's Radagon of the Golden Order.
I think those are some very good and interesting observations there. There was something else I wanted to say in relation to that, but honestly, because those were so good, I just kind of forgot what it was. Anyway, fudge.
To sort of, like, try to make sense of everything. Radagon, Marika, completely different people, to start with. Marika seems to want to fuse with someone. There is this whole recurring thing of, like, two people or one person, you can have two bodies and one soul. The Golden Order is all about, like, perfection. It's about, like, we have to remove all instabilities, things like that. So her wanting to fuse with someone seems to be part of, like, helping her understand the Golden Order, or perhaps to do with breaking the Elden Ring, I don't know. Godfrey apparently doesn't want to be part of that. Godfrey loses his grace. The asterisk there is that he seems to lose his grace when he runs out of people to kill. Marika does.
All right, I remember the thing that I was going to bring up. So yeah, the whole question between Godfrey and Marika is just very frustrating to me, because it's like, why doesn't our Tarnish just ever ask a damn question? Why doesn't he just be like, oh, Godfrey, you want to know what's going on with Marika? Me too. I want to just be a fly on this wall for this conversation you two are about to have. But no, our dumbass character just has to not let that happen at all. Can't even just sneak up by crouching to peek in. Zoinks. The other thing was maybe Godfrey couldn't potentially merge with Marika because of Sarash. Maybe he would have had too much bloodlust and Marika couldn't use that because they wanted more knowledge and more civilization and to strip away the wildness of Godfrey. But those are just, some conjecture. Anyway, yeah.
Divested of his grace. I don't know specifically if it's to do with, like, she divests him, like, literally when he runs out of people to kill, or if he says no to her when she's like, we should probably fuse at some point. He's like, no.
And then she's like, well, then I think we should see other people.
Yes. Radagon is a replacement for Godfrey because Radagon, he's like the anti-Godfrey in a lot of ways. Godfrey is all about, like, individual strength, like, I am the Lord because I have killed everyone. I am the most powerful. My authority comes from my crown, which I won through strength. Contrast, Radagon is a loyal dog. Radagon does what he's told. That, I think, is the genesis of why she picks Radagon, because she needs someone who basically won't answer back, who will do what he is, even if he thinks it's the wrong thing to do. And from what we can tell, he probably did think it was the wrong thing to do because Renal is heartbroken. And, like, Radagon doesn't seem that happy. So she fuses with him. Thou art yet to become me, thou art yet to become a god. They fuse together. They have 2 children. The children are both born with something wrong with them, presumably because their parents are fused together now. There's, like, bits and pieces missing, so one's a child forever, one has a horrible disease.
So yeah, going back to the idea of them being 2 people, I think just kind of leads back into Muriel's question about, like, what did Marika really actually see in Radagon? Like, why would she have chosen Radagon if he was a completely different person than any other figure in the Lands Between, I guess, is my question, other than, like, his loyalty. Perhaps the idea that he was on board with the Golden Order stuff and divesting people of grace. I don't know. It seems like you run into a lot of issues trying to address Marika's motivations for believing in the Golden Order at that period in time, and Radagon specifically. But again, the Age of Abundance was coming to a close and the Erd Tree was dying, so maybe she just latched on to the first idea that seemed plausible enough to work in her mind. Maybe that could be a strong enough argument to be in favor of her union with Radagon, but I don't know.
So they're fused now, and then some point after that, presumably as a result of Godwyn dying, she breaks the ring. He tries to fix the ring. This might have happened simultaneously. And if it did happen simultaneously, that would sort of make a lot of sense, because the whole, like, notion of, like, the Golden Order and the ring and everything is, like, all these things have to be balanced. There's all these, like, twinned things, like 2 people that share one soul. There's 2 principles that underline it. The 2 fingers are, like, the good ones because they're in balance, because there's 2 of them. The principles that underline the order, like, they're actually about, like, the fact that everything's connected and everything kind of goes back to one point. So them being fused, it does make sense, like that. But exactly what it accomplishes is, like, kind of a question mark. I think the fact that when you encounter them, Marika does not have the Elden Ring in her, and Radagon does, even though they're the same person, it might actually have been a way for Marika to sort of maintain something of the Golden Order within her, even when she destroyed it or lost it, because she's also fused with Radagon, who does have it. And then, of course, when that's over, when Radagon is dead, she gets it back again. But there's...
So the way that I look at that specifically is with the Elden Ring appearing in Radagon. To a certain extent, the Elden Ring is synonymous with the Elden Beast. And as far as the Beast's perspective is concerned, it may be that it sees Marika as a threat, and so therefore it would choose to ally itself with Radagon, who does not see the Elden Beast as a threat and does not try to actively kill the Elden Beast / shatter the Elden Ring. And for what it's worth, we do have the Elden Beast doing a crucifix style grab attack, which is super cool, super rare, and when it does do it, the player is definitely heavily incentivized to dodge away from it. So I'm certain a lot of people haven't seen it. Let me try to pull up the footage, because it's pretty similar to how you can see Marika's posed in the Erd Tree. So it's kind of hard to get really good footage because this attack is so hard to get him to do. So yeah. Here we get crucified kind of like Marika, and rather than having, like, the red spear, which I think would have been, like, cooler in terms of, like, having that kind of internal consistency, he just, like, shoots the crap out of us with a bunch of, like, the amber starlight. And then another angle of it. Okay, so it looks like the first attack can come from different angles, because like the first time it came like from behind us, but this time it looked more like up and down. Anyway, that'll be good enough right there. Yeah, and like I said before, I've wondered whether or not that red spear is supposed to be related to Destined Death, and would have been related to Malekith. KD says the problem with it is that it would mean that the Elden Beast popped out and then came back in for some reason. So I think like you could say that the Elden Ring is the Elden Beast, potentially. And maybe by adding more mending runes to it, you're like fixing the beast. But anyway, the way that I look at it is the Elden Beast might have gone along with a kind of rewrite of the order, but I think with Marika shattering it with no backup plan to go with, maybe that's when it kind of rebelled with Radagon. And we don't necessarily know if it took over Radagon, and that's another burning question about what Marika and Radagon's deal is. And then to like press that point a bit further, is like the Elden Beast the equivalent of Sarash for Radagon? I don't mean that like literally, like I don't think like Radagon came across like an Elden Beast in the wild and was like, hey buddy, let's get grafted, you know. But anyway,
all this stuff in there about like becoming one with the Golden Order, and this is to do with this like concepts we're told about regression and causality. So regression, the idea behind regression is like everything is sort of pulling toward one point. So two people, they're fused together, they're pulling toward one point, sort of makes sense. And the other is causality. The idea behind causality is that everything is connected. If there's this giant sort of like web of connections all through the world, everything is one. So again, everything's one, two people become one person. May actually explain something about the Elden Ring. If like she's breaking it, he's fixing it, it's locked in stasis, kind of. That's one way of maybe looking at it, that like if you simultaneously break and repair the ring as two different people, you keep things kind of stable. But yeah, there's so much like going on in it that we're probably going to be talking about this a while.
And Sophie, you mentioned that Marika wanted to understand how the Order works?
Yeah.
If she wanted to do that, why didn't she just go to Dignity City?
So, hi to everyone new.
Sophie, do the outro.
That was the Snack Covenant episode 293, Marika and Radagon and Marika.
Or Maragon and Radika.
Maragon sounds like a spice.
Like Spice Spice Baby.
That's Ice Ice Baby.
Thank you, Sophie.
Thank you, Sin.
And thank you everyone for listening. And see y'all next time.
Bye!
Hello! As the Dignity City mascot, I have been reviewing the many applications that we have received ever since our new YouTube advertising campaign began. And I cannot tell a lie, the quality of the applications has been sorry, the podcast is over. Have a good day, everybody, and hello to everyone who is new.
alright everybody, that was SinclairLore's video about Radagon, Marika, 1-2 a fusion, a shattering. Go ahead and leave them a like if you enjoyed the video. Go ahead and subscribe to their channel, all that fun stuff. They are members of the Roundtable Hold. We will probably be looking at some more of their videos in the future as well. So, and Sinclair, thank you for joining the stream. I appreciate that. And for sharing this video with us. It had a lot of very interesting insights that I enjoyed. And definitely not Jesus, welcome into the stream yourself. And you were saying that perhaps the Elden Beast's crucifix attack not being red is a clue that it was a combination of the Elden Beast and Destined Death. Since her shadow controls death and death and the Elden Beast controls her shadow, it's not a stretch. Yeah, I think that's a possibility because there is also the stuff with EG talking about Blythe becoming Bale to Ranni, because that's kind of what Shadowhound Beasts do. The question is, where does he get that information from, unless it's happened in the past? So there could have been other Empyreans that it happened to. It could have also potentially happened to Marika, and that's kind of what I wonder Malekith's sin comes from. But that's another story for another time, and I don't really have good answers or even like a lot of good plausible ideas about that subject specifically. Right. And once again, Sinclair, thank you for sharing the video with us. I appreciate that. And just to paste the link again, if you guys want to give them a visit. All right, so moving on from there, we will go into Radagon is a mimic of Marika, an Elden Ring lore theory by Kosmos. So this is something that I've kind of suspected for a while, especially when I saw the Cut Asimi questline text in the files, because I don't know, it's interesting. I'm assuming Kosmos is going to talk about that directly, so since this video is pretty short, let's just go ahead and dive on in.
Endures to this day as to why Lord Radagon would cast Lady Rennala aside, and moreover, why a mere champion would be chosen for the seat of Elden Lord.
Radagon of the Golden Order is the second Elden Lord and the consort of the God Queen Marika. Players will come to face him as the final boss of the game, but his presence and role in the lore make him one of the game's most important actors. One of the game's major revelations is that Radagon is in fact Marika, though in what capacity that is the case is a commonly discussed topic in the community. Some think that Marika is disguising herself as Radagon and living a double life, while others that Radagon and Marika are two halves of the same being that separated from each other and later reunited when shattering the Elden Ring. But today I'm coming to you with a completely different theory, that Radagon is actually an entity similar to the Mimic Tears, and is a copy of Marika herself. This theory is one that I personally believe, and unlike my previous videos about Selen being Ranni's sister, check it out by the way, this one will have a huge effect on my overall interpretation of the game's main lore. And so, let's take a look at the hints the game left us.
So, before diving too deeply into this theory, well, I do think it has some very interesting implications. I don't necessarily think there's enough concrete evidence to go along with it based on what is in the current retail build of the game. I think lacking the Asimi questline really makes this come across as a lot more far-fetched until you do get that context. And even if you do have that context, there are a lot of unresolved questions that get brought up as a result of it. Like, of course, and this isn't, just limited to the Mimic Tier theory, but anyway, just like, what does that have to do with like the Gloam-Eyed Queen's role? What does that have to do with the Nox? Does that make Radagon a stand-in for the Lord of the Night? I don't necessarily think that's the case, so that's kind of why I'm a little bit against the theory, but I just really like it in terms of like the thematic presence I think it could have, especially like the whole idea of artificial or like synthetic life gaining sentience and like what that could entail, and just the idea of mimics in general are something that has just always been very fascinating to me for a variety of reasons. So Katie asked, would you say that that's my headcanon? That Radagon and Marika are mimic tiers? No, not necessarily, but I do think like despite everything, this theory is plausible enough to potentially stand on its own. Although I might be getting ahead of myself here. I'm not exactly sure how Kosmos is going to make that argument, especially in such a short time frame. So I'm very curious how this video is structured, Because I imagine like making the setup for it would take a lot of time. So maybe they just are very concise, which is impressive if true.
First, let's talk about the Mimic Tears. This silvery liquid is a creation of the Eternal City. As much a substance as it is a life form, they are an existence that put into question what defines life. They can seemingly take on the form of any living being, from animals to humans, and even plants. But here is the interesting part. The Silver Tears were created for a very specific reason. They were an attempt by the Eternals at manufacturing a Lord. We can find multiple references to that in items, but most importantly in a cut quest line where the player takes in a silver tear who calls itself a simi in their body. During that quest line, the player would have been gathering special liquid from the Eternal Cities to strengthen the silver tear until it would eventually separate from you as a perfect copy of your character and fight you for the title of Lord. This quest shows us two interesting things. First, the ability of the Mimic Tear to merge with its original, and second, it gave us this interaction between Melina and the Mimic Tear.
Is there another person inside of you? Did you want that to happen? I sense no malice. Do as you think best. Hello, other you. I am Melina, and I am traveling with this person. We might be together for some time. Pleased to meet you.
She addresses Asimi as the other you, meaning that the Mimic Tear at that point is also considered the player character. Be sure to remember this specific wording used here by Melina, as it will be relevant later. To conclude this section, I would like to say this. Though the Mimic Tears we meet in-game were the result of the Eternal City's attempts at crafting a Lord, nothing in the game ever implies that they ultimately failed. Radagon, the second Elden Lord, was a champion of the Golden Order, who suddenly appeared during the Leonian Wars and later became the husband of the Lunar Queen. But after Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, was exiled from the lands between, he was summoned by Queen Marika to be her consort, something that was considered very odd. And indeed, there was more to it unbeknownst to everyone.
You know, it's said that Lord Radagon harbored a secret. A famed sculptor of the Erdtree capital was once summoned to render Lord Radagon's likeness in giant stature, when he glimpsed the skeleton in Radagon's closet. And as such, it's said the great statue harbors his secret too.
Miriel tells us that Radagon carries a secret, and we later find out that Radagon is in fact Marika. This revelation explains why in the intro cutscene, the divine blacksmith, who we now know is Radagon and Marika, was seemingly switching genders. But we need to also be clear. Marika and Radagon were not always fused as they were when the Elden Ring was being shattered.
I guess you could say a Mimic Tear brings a new definition to the meaning of gender fluid.
The echo of Marika in the Queen's bedchamber makes it clear that they were separate entities up to that point.
Spoken echoes linger here. Words of Queen Marika, who vanished long ago. If you wish, I will share them with you. In Marika's own words, O Radagon, leal hound of the Golden Order, thou art yet to become me. Thou art yet to become a god. Let us be shattered, both. Mine other self.
Something else I would like to point out is the specific wording used here. Marika refers to Radagon as her other self, and not as her other half, as I have seen it frequently misquoted. This is the same.
That's something I should double check in Japanese. As far as I'm recollecting, I'm pretty sure that just might be the same word localized a couple different ways. I'm pretty sure it's just Hanshin, which is like half body, and Blythe is referred to that as well as Malekith, I think, at times. But I might be misremembering, because I mean it's a lot of text to remember in 2 languages, let alone 1. But since I'm on the note of like translational idiosyncrasies, one thing that I think is just kind of neat in terms of like where the name Simi came from is, if we pull up our handy dandy G show again, this is the term for the mimic tier, like the normal style mimic tiers in the game. So obviously this isn't romanized, so you can't see it super well. So like Utsushi Mi. So another way this can be pronounced is like so Ashimi that's kind of where it comes from. So like a copy or photographed or a reflected me, which is like a person. So it's like a reflected person. So like a copy essentially is what they're saying. So that's kind of where like the mimic tier comes from. It doesn't mean like mimic in the same way as like Marika's mischief, unfortunately. But anyway, the idea that the mimic tier sees you and then reflects yourself back at you is kind of what this is getting at. And that's kind of where like the name Asimi comes from in terms of like the localization that's still technically content. Again, not too important, but there might be some people who think that's neat, like me. Oh yeah, and Crunchy brings up another good one, that it's the same way Lieutenant refers to Lobo. Yeah, I'll need to like double check that text. Maybe not while this video is going on, because there's really not a lot of time left, surprisingly. So yeah, let's just go ahead and dive back in.
Same way that Melina addresses Asimi as the other you. And so it seems that Radagon was an entity separate from Marika, but also an almost perfect copy of her, if not for the fact that he is not the vessel of the Elden Ring, as that would also make him a god.
Queen Marika is the vessel of the Elden Ring, carrier of its vision. A god in truth. But after the Elden Ring's shattering, she was imprisoned in the Erd Tree. A grim punishment for shattering the Order, despite her godhood.
This is where we should turn our attention to Queen Marika the Eternal.
Alright, actually, yeah, on the other hand, I figure maybe we should just like look at the differences like side by side. So, of course, that happens. I should have remembered that was going to happen. So, let's just type in other half. So, we get, what's her face? Lieutenant talking about Lobo. And then, my other half, not enough. No, that one's Lieutenant. So, who's the bottom one? Well, we'll come back down to it and figure it out. Other half is still Lieutenant talking about Castle Soul. So what does Melina call Radagon, Leelhound, mine other self? Okay, let me pull up the Japanese one real quick. So other self is Waga Hanshin yo. So Hanshin is what I was just talking about, like half body, and yeah, okay, we'll just do a quick search for this rather than like cross-referencing. Okay, so what does this correspond to really quickly? Was my other half not enough? So that's Lieutenant and Lobo. So that's going to be repeated a couple times. So this has 14, whereas like the other one had 9 in English. Still talking about Lobo there. Still Lieutenant. This is a... What is this? Just being quick about this. Through and through. Oh, an Ash of War. No wonder why. Okay. So this is talking about Lobo because it's Lieutenant's wolf. So it seems like other half is specifically between Marika and Latenna. So I guess I was misremembering with the Malekith and Blythe stuff, unfortunately. So we'll just kind of leave that there. So wait, let's just go back to other you. So this one is pretty straightforward in the Japanese. I did glance at this in that time we were just like looking at the video real quickly. And so Mo Hitori no Anata. So like the other you, the other like one person in you, or like the one other of you, I guess is what she's saying. So going back to Kosmos's video, I'm going to back up just so I could like remember what he was saying about like why it's important to remember the differences.
Radagon, the second Elden Lord, was a champion of the Golden Order, who suddenly appeared during the Leonian Wars.
Oh yeah, and Matt says Blythe calls himself Ronnie's other half. And of course, like, this is just me looking at these two words right here, and I could not have like the proper syntax. So just like take this with a grain of salt that there might be a little bit more to it that I just don't remember off the top of my head.
And later became the husband of the Lunar Queen. But after Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, was exiled from the lands between, he was summoned by Queen Marika to be her consort, something that was considered very odd. And indeed, there was more to it unbeknownst to everyone.
You know, it's said that Lord Radagon harbored a secret. A famed sculptor of the Erdtree capital was once summoned to render Lord Radagon's likeness in giant stature, when he glimpsed the skeleton in Radagon's closet. And as such, it's said the great statue harbors his secret too.
Miriel tells us that Radagon carries a secret, and we later find out that Radagon is in fact Marika. This revelation explains why in the intro cutscene, the divine blacksmith, who we now know is Radagon and Marika, was seemingly switching genders. But we need to also be clear. Marika and Radagon were not always fused as they were when the Elden Ring was being shattered. The echo of Marika in the Queen's bedchamber makes it clear that they were separate entities up to that point.
Spoken echoes linger here. Words of Queen Marika, who vanished long ago. If you wish, I will share them with you. In Marika's own words, O Radagon, leal hound of the Golden Order, thou art yet to become me. Thou art yet to become a god. Let us be shattered, both. Mine other self.
Something else I would...
Actually, Spaghetti made a really crazy connection that I didn't even think of how well it could work in English. That asimi could be like assimilation. That's kind of mind-blowing and just an amazing coincidence. Okay, so yeah, I don't think Latenna is referring to the medallion as the other half. I would need to like double check that, but I don't think it's going to be that significant. It doesn't really say anything about their personhood.
Would like to point out is the specific wording used here. Marika refers to Radagon as her other self, and not as her other half, as I have seen it frequently misquoted.
Okay, so as we just looked... do I have this in the other tab? Okay. As we just looked here a second ago, we have... Leal Hound. Mine other self. Whereas, I guess that's like a little bit of a... gives it a little bit more distance in English, but the Japanese here directly is definitely other half. Like half the body, half length, but it's literally like half body, half person. So this is just a localization thing. But let's see the rest of his points. Not that I like really think that detracts. I just... Anyway.
This is the same way that Melina addresses Asimi as the other you. And so it seems that Radagon was an entity separate from Marika, but also an almost perfect copy of her, if not for the fact that he is not the vessel of the Elden Ring. as that would also make him a god.
Queen Marika is the vessel of the Elden Ring.
So yeah, I don't think that fully fits in quite the way he's arguing, but then again, I don't think this like really like shoots down the theory by any means, but just in terms of like being as exact as we can, I think it's just kind of important to have this context so that way we can better refine our theories. So this isn't really like a jab at like what Kosmos is doing. This is just more like, okay, can we support it? Can we confirm it? And if so, cool. And if not, why not? Can we refine our ideas further? So, yeah, I still don't think this is like the worst theory by any means. I like it. I wish it was true to a certain extent. It just doesn't have quite as much support as I think it fully needs to go beyond the realm of headcanon for me.
This is where we should turn our attention to Queen Marika the Eternal. Throughout the game, we learn very few things about her, but in the very little we know, we can deduce something of major importance. From the Numen rune, we learn that Marika herself is of the same kind, and from Roger that the Numen women who make up the Black Knife Assassins are said to be scions of the Eternal City. A scion means a person of noble descent, and the Black Knife Assassins are also said to have close ties to Marika herself. And so it seems that the Numens are nobles of the Eternal City, and that Marika is also from the Eternal City. In classic FromSoft fashion, it was in her name all along. If you are still not convinced, data miners also found out that the enemies of the Eternal City are called Marika lineage in their AI file.
And this is something that I found out, I mean, not just me, I'm sure somebody else has looked at this, is in 1.0 as well. We do have a screenshot of this available. Bam! Spirit Ashes summons the spirit of a descendant of Marika from nearby a rebirth monument found throughout the land. And these are the Night Maiden and Swordstress puppets that are Nox Stella, or just Nox maidens and citizens, whatever you want to call them. The maidens, the monks. Yeah. So there is a bit of a pseudo-explicit confirmation of Marika's potential ties to the Eternal Cities. And as Kosmos, I think, just said that she is called like Queen Marika the Eternal, that is another potential connection. But it's a little bit weird because it's like in Japanese, there are other mentions to eternity or like the Eternals that aren't explicitly connected to the Nox. So it is a little bit vague, unfortunately. But at the very least, there is quite a bit of teeth to this theory overall that Marika should have had more connections to the Nox between not only this cut content now, but also with the stuff with the Black Knife Assassins and their plot that eventually would go on to trigger the Shattering. The smocking gun indeed.
And we also know that Marika has direct ties to mimicry through the Mimic Veil item.
Wait, he was doing a Mimic tier cosplay and no-hitting Radagon for footage? I wasn't paying attention. That's awesome.
The fact that the Queen Marika is from the Eternal City completely recontextualizes a lot of the events in the history of the lands between, and starts to shed some light in her obscure motivations. But more specifically for this video, it explains how it would be possible for Radagon to be a copy of Marika, as she is a noble of the Eternal City, the civilization that wished to create a lord through mimicry. At this point, the dots connect themselves. For my last piece of evidence, I would like to talk about the Ember Egg. The egg is a sacred relic of the Golden Order that contains a great rune, and is used by Rennala to practice the art of rebirth. But originally, it was a gift from Radagon to her when he left to become Elden Lord.
I really hope that he brings up the idea that it takes silver tiers to initiate the rebirth process.
In the end, Lady Rennala was left alone, cradling the amber egg Lord Radagon bequeathed her. Now she devotes herself to it through forbidden rite, the grim art of reincarnation.
The egg itself makes use of the core of a mimic tier to function. And so the idea is that it was used to craft, or you could even say, birth, Radagon. But while working on rounding up everything for this video, I came up on something incredible. If we try to take a better look as to what's inside the ember egg, we can find locks of red hair. The same signature red hair that is famously associated with Radagon.
So I think this kind of got disproven later, and I don't remember where I saw this, but it was very recent. Maybe it was in... Was it one? I don't think it was one of the movie or videos we watched recently, but I think Zully the Witch showed that within the egg, there's actually supposed to be the juvenile scholars, which do not have red hair, unfortunately.
And so here is my proposition. Radagon is a copy of Marika, and the culmination of the Eternal City's work on the Silver Tiers. With the power of the Ember Egg and the Great Rune, Marika crafted an Elden Lord as a perfect copy of herself. But the real question remains still. Why? Why was crafting a Lord as a copy of herself so imperative to Marika's plan? After all, as the Mimic Ash tells us, and as the Asimi questline shows us, the copy created by mimicry does not extend to copying the user's will. And indeed, we know from Marika's hammer that Radagon did end up going against Marika in the end, when she shattered the Elden Ring. The good news is that I believe I have some good guesses as to what the answer is. But sadly, that will be for another video. So I hope...
So there is like one other description which can kind of really help support this idea. I'm trying to remember what it is exactly. Is it his icon? It's not the Great Rune. Oh, it's just called a Radagon icon. It's not possessive. So, as the husband of Renala of Karya, the red-haired Radagon studied sorcery, and as the husband of Queen Marika, he studied incantations. Thus did the hero aspire to be complete. And just to give a little bit more context, because this is something that I noticed. Wait, what? Why am I... Oh, I just don't have enough space because it's not maximized. So if we type in this and look for it in Japanese, so the final bit about... Or sorry, not exactly the final bit. The beginning portion where it says the husband of Renala of Karya, he studied sorcery. This second part is technically hearsay in Japanese. As the husband of Queen Marika, he studied incantations. So it's arguable whether or not it's the entire thing where studying sorcery as Renala is part of the hearsay. But at the very least, this is definitely hearsay because we have our favorite Toyu, which means like it is said that he studied incantations as the husband of Queen Marika. So anyway, just wanted to go back to the idea that the hero aspired to be complete. This makes it sound as though he's fragmented, which could potentially go well with the idea of him being a copy, like not a real boy. So I think that's very good contextual support for the idea that Radagon isn't quite as he seems, which I'm a little bit surprised Kosmos didn't bring up. But overall, I think this is a very good video, especially to get it done within 11 minutes.
I hope you guys look forward to the big lore video where I give my interpretation of the quote-unquote main lore of Elden Ring. And there you go. Be sure to let me know what you think in the comments below and like and subscribe to support the video. Also, you can follow me on Twitch and Twitter. Bye.
Hello, everyone.
Good job for the quick outro as well, I guess. All right, so everybody, that was the video by Kosmos. I'm going to go ahead and paste that into the chat if you want to go ahead and give him a like and or subscribe. Radagon is a mimic of Marika, an Elden Ring theory by Kosmos. Good stuff. All right, Ask the Next, thanks for dropping in, and hopefully we'll catch you on the next one. You weren't expecting the video to be this convincing? Nice. Yeah, so that's something I've wondered for a while, and like I was saying before, I think the bigger issue with saying that Radagon is a mimic is that it doesn't align super well with the idea of the Lord of the Night. Lord of Night, maybe? So, now the Nox live under a false night sky in eternal anticipation of their liege, of the coming age of the stars, and their Lord of Night. So if Radagon was the kind of lord that the Nox were trying to make, at the very least, their attempts were a failure, which might go back into how the Mimic tier doesn't say that they were successful, if I remember correctly. Mimic tiers are the result of an attempt by the Eternal City to forge a lord, so it doesn't sound as though they were necessarily successful, but those are kind of like the biggest criticisms against the idea that the Nox pissed off the Greater Will, so why would Radagon be the champion of the Golden Order, which seems to like be the puppet of the Greater Will, I guess. So that might have been a bigger possibility earlier in development, we don't know. But anyway, I do think that was a good video, and I hope you guys enjoyed it as well. Goddess Baguette says, Marika and the Golden Greater Will seem to be super opportunistic, which makes sense. So they did cert with the evidence presented Radagon was made somehow to be the solution to the Carian War and eventually the Lord problem. Alright. Okay, so moving on next from Kosmos' video.
Hello everyone, welcome.
Now we have the Artificial Lord Theory by Honored Madman, and I'm unfamiliar with his content. I believe this was suggested to me, or maybe I just thought it looked cool when I was looking up this Radagon stuff. I don't remember exactly. So let's go ahead and dive on in. And I imagine it's going to be related to what we had just watched. Teen Sith's big pain point with this sort of argument is it relies on old data mined information, which we have no idea when it was first added or last changed. Yeah, and that's kind of how I feel about it as well. So, like, I like the idea. I think you can still make the argument even without the Asimi stuff, but it becomes a lot less stable as far as its foundations are concerned. So I do kind of expect an Asimi parallel to make an appearance in the DLC, kind of similar to the way that the Bloodborne Snail Ladies and Research Hall patients had cut content parallels before that DLC was released. So time will tell, maybe I'm wrong, but that's just it would kind of go along with previous forms of cut content in FromSoft games. Alright, now let's go ahead and dive on in.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Honored Madman. I hope you're doing well. So there's a bit of a running joke on my channel about how I refer to Radagon as Marika's pet science project. And it's partially a joke, but I also kind of think it's the truth. I mean, I truly think that she experimented and created this homunculus artificial god thing, or excuse me, lord. And now I guess a quick recap on Radagon is in order. We are blatantly told in the game that Radagon and Marika are the same person, but we're also given several examples of Marika literally talking to Radagon as if he were someone else, or at the very least a different aspect of maybe her own being. But all we really know about the guy is told to us through item descriptions or through characters like Muriel the Turtle Pope. Despite all his impact, he isn't really mentioned directly by a lot of the surviving characters.
Yeah, and I think this is a good point, and maybe I was just like too lost in the Trees of the Forest in Kosmos' video with the way that he was talking about how she refers to Radagon as her other half, whereas I feel like the way that Honored Madman has like presented this right now is a better juxtaposition to say that, well, I guess he hasn't like made the final point yet, but it would be a better juxtaposition to say like she's talking to somebody else the same way that like Melina talks to us and the way that Isimi would talk to us in that content quest line. So, of course, it is a big shame that it didn't make it into the final builds of the game, because it would really strengthen this kind of theory.
So real quick, I'm going to try to go over everything I know about Rads Rickelson, and if I miss anything, I'm sure you guys will let me know in the comments.
Rads Rickelson is a new one
America's
for me.
conquest against the Giants, explaining his hatred of their red hair, supposedly. More on that later. He was also tasked with conquering Liurnia, the land of sorcerers and astrology. He was beaten back or fought to a stalemate twice by the Lunar Queen Renala, and the two of them eventually put aside their differences, got married, and had some kids. And interestingly enough, their kids were arguably the strongest out of all the demigods. Again, I said arguably. Now, once he was married to Queen Renala, he proposed several changes to the Carian royal family's way of life, including but not restricted to forcing the preceptors to wear these goofy masks that indicated to all that their businesses were strictly private because they served the royal family of Caria and all that. Which seems, to me at least, to be evidence that Radagon had at least something to hide. Maybe a secret identity, or the fact that he wasn't real. Eventually.
And that's what I was forgetting when I got distracted when we were watching Sinclair's lore video earlier. SinclairLore's video earlier. That the one reason why I think that Radagon and Marika were one person was because of the stuff with the Preceptor set and sewing their mouths shut. And I do wonder whether or not Renala had some knowledge of Radagon's true identity or potential relationship with Marika because of this, even though it's never stated and she talks about being heartbroken. Maybe she was heartbroken because she was deceived and essentially had like the treasures of Caria plundered from her, but I also don't think that matches super well with like needing 3 kids to do it, I guess. So maybe Marika just enjoyed herself. Anyway.
Eventually, though, Radagon was recalled back to Leyndell. There, Marika married him, making him the second Elden Lord after she sent Godfrey on his way to go die out in the Badlands to become stronger. Radagon abandoning Renala also had its side effects as well. It looks as though somehow her connection to the full moon has been severed, which could be Radagon's doing, or she could have just lost her will, but either way, the Academy Lords have lost faith with her because of this. And they soon start to rebel, causing a civil war between the Carian royal family and the entire Academy of Rey Lucaria.
So, just to go back to what he said a moment ago, I think it is sort of explicit that the Carians lost their mojo because the Fate in the Night Sky got fettered by the Golden Order, and to me that should be pretty clear that it's a reference to Renala and Radagon being wed in matrimony, and Renala is more or less Radagon's ball and chain, as some may say.
But Radagon wasn't thinking about any of that, he just headed back home to Leyndell. They then had 2 kids together who we'll get into their creation a little bit later in the video. But they're 2 of the more afflicted demigods that we come across in the game. Mikola, who's in a weird slumbery cocoon form that has been maybe violated by the Formless Mother or her agent Mog. And let's not forget about his other spawn, the severed harpy Melania, who is more than content just to hang around the Halig Tree and wait for her brother to come home all on his own, even though...
Alright, so I wondered, because of the voice, is Honored Madman the same dude as an Angel of the Past? I thought that when the video first started, but I figured it was just kind of a coincidence. But as soon as you said Mog, that just made me really go into overdrive Pepe Sylvia territory here. I don't know. I assume they're different people, but there's just kind of a funny coincidence between like the tones of the voices and then just saying Moog as Mog.
He doesn't appear very capable of that right now. Anyway, though, during his time as Elden Lord, Radagon used a bunch of the shit he learned during his time with the Carians to create a bunch of new incantations that combined Golden Order magic with Carian sorcery, which is a bit similar to what his son Rykard did with the volcano hexes of Mount Gelmir, turning the ancient obscure magic of the volcano into modern-day sorceries. Radagon would also close down all of the Colosseums that are dotted throughout the Lands Between, essentially putting a bunch of duelists and mad pumpkinheads out of a job, although they do appear to have found work as grave tenders and mercenaries. No one knows why Rykard did this as far as I know, but I guess he just wasn't a fan of having fun. The last event that I can think of that links to Radagon is the Shattering itself. See, after the Night of Black Knives, for whatever reason, Marika felt it necessary to shatter the Elden Ring. Radagon, being the lapdog of the Golden Order that he is, attempted to repair it. It's presumably this paradox of events that leads to them both being trapped within the Erd Tree, at least until we come along. And since that was such an unnecessarily long recap of events, let's have our intro, shall we? Now, I do think, though, that Radagon started out as one of her alter egos. For example, I can't really find much characterization on Radagon's part, so I'm led to believe that it was Marika who disguised herself as him and then infiltrated the Carians, married Renala, even had kids with Renala, then, learned everything she could from the Carians and dipped out, and it was supposedly under the cover of Radagon being recalled to Marika after she sent Godfrey away. And then she surprisingly made Radagon Elden Lord to the surprise of pretty much everybody, especially our dear Turtle Pope Muriel. Since Radagon was viewed as just a mere champion of Marika's and nothing more, not really fit to be the consort of the goddess herself, It looks sus to basically everybody. Now let's get to the meat and potatoes. How did Marika theoretically create Radagon after, using him as an alter ego for presumably years at this point? Well, look no further than the Mimic Tears. One of the Nox's many attempts to craft a lord of their own. One of these things can easily be an effective ally, as it's known to fight alongside its summoner in the case of the Spirit Ashes, while also taking their form and now possessing a multitude of their abilities. However, this mimicry does not extend to imitating the summoner's will, quite bluntly stating that these Mimic Tears have wills of their own goals, their own purposes, their own belief systems. Now, I don't think mimicking a god would be that simple, really. I mean, I guess getting the appearance wouldn't be hard, but the rest of it probably would, like mimicking the abilities of a god. Now, you might also be wondering by this point, where did Marika get knowledge of the Nox's experiments with Silver Tears and Mimic Tears and trying to craft a lord and all of that? Well, I can't seem to prove it, but the Nox appear to be some type of distant descendant or maybe relative race of the Newman. Marika is referred to as a Newman woman, and so are all of the Black Knife assassins, and you, the player, can start off as one too. Now, it's important to note that these women were also referred to as the Scions of the Eternal Cities. So perhaps the Newmen were who led the Nox, like maybe it was their nobility. So that alone would connect Marika to the infamous Silver Tears and the experiments of the Nox, especially their attempts to...
Alright, and I did mean to mention this in the Kosmos video, that unfortunately, literally everything relating to the Newman is listed as hearsay in the Japanese. So, it's annoying. I don't necessarily think we need to doubt it. I'm just saying, don't be surprised if FromSoft pulls a Trixie on us and changes things further on down the line, essentially.
Craft a lord. I mean, it sounds a lot like what I'm alleging that she's attempting to do, or successfully did, rather. Now, I suppose we could also say that maybe Marika knew nothing about what the Nox were doing and had no knowledge of their experiments prior to, the events of the game. But then again, if she was the one who disguised herself as Radagon and seduced Renala, she would be the one who learned a bunch of, basically, homunculus science project knowledge, and presumably would be able to craft her own lord, since she had all the ingredients on hand. Personally, I think it can go either way. I think it's also very possible that Marika could have already created Radagon by this point. With all her knowledge of Nox science and whatnot, maybe she didn't even need the Carians for that. I think it's more likely she needed the Carians to create Ranni. But I guess...
Ranni. But anyway, one of the weirder things about the whole reconciling Marika potentially being related to the Nox and the Eternals, which I probably should have mentioned much earlier when we were talking about this before, is that one good reason to argue Marika shouldn't be related to the Eternal Cities is that she didn't seem to use or have a lot of access to sorceries because of the failed attempt to take over Liurnia if she was Radagon, I guess. and the need for Radagon to study sorcery from Renala to begin with. If Marika was the Queen of the Nox, we do know that they used some sorceries with like the Night Maiden's Mist, but they weren't all like glintstone sorceries, sort of, because even that much can be arguable with the later ties the Nox would have to Celia and their kind of night sorceries, I guess. And we don't really have any direct connections between night sorceries and Marika. And if they did have a stronger connection, you would imagine that it wouldn't necessarily have taken Radagon wedding Renala to bind the knights. But maybe Renala's true power and the knight's true power is more associated with the moon, so maybe you can make that kind of argument. I don't know. Dr. N asks, has FromSoft fully went on hearsay to change stuff explicitly within a game? Yes. So the easiest example that I can always point to is in Elden Ring with how the astrologer set, and maybe I have a picture available. Let me double check. The astrologer set says they read fate in the stars and are said to be heirs of the glintstone sorceries. So if you just take this robe on its own and have no other information, that would very easily cause someone to believe that astrologers came after glintstone sorceries. This is like a very typical item in a FromSoft game, you know? However, what item is it? Actually, I should probably just look for this. The Preceptor set says, glintstone sorcerers are the descendants of astrologers, a fact that the Carians remain aware of, even if their fate has long been severed from the stars. So this astrologer set right here... Oh, well. The astrologer robe right here is a kind of red herring. So this is one concrete example of FromSoft pulling a Trixie on the player, and they're very kind to just kind of clue us into the real facts of the matter in this description. And there are other examples throughout their games, but I don't remember what they are exactly off the top of my head because like I just kind of always point to that one now that we have something very easy. Another example that I kind of mentioned earlier in the stream is how in the Japanese version of Radagon's icon, I think I actually prepared this for a short, so did I not make an English one to go with it? Okay, it must be in the thing. Anyway, the Japanese version of... One second. I'll pull up my short that I made. Elden Ring. In the Japanese version of this, it's listed as hearsay that he studied incantations as the husband of Queen Marika. So if Marika and Radagon are two different people, this would make the most sense that he would have needed to have studied sorcery from her. But if they are one person, this being hearsay makes it more likely that he wouldn't have needed to study sorceries under Marika because he is Marika, which goes along with the whole statue reveal in Leyndell that says Radagon is Marika. Alright, Teen Sith, you take care for the night. That contradiction has always driven you crazy. How's it read in Japanese? What is the Japanese for Numen? Marebito, which just means like a celestial visitor or a visitor from another land. Let's just pull up a G-show real quick. Marebito. I think they just use hiragana for it. So visitor from afar, joy bringing spirit from the divine realms. And I thought there'd be like the Wikipedia. Okay, no, this is the kanji that I was expecting. I didn't realize... Oh, this is literally just like the guest kanji. Oh, of course it says it right there. I didn't realize there's another form of it. Yeah, so I was expecting this, because that's what's used in Elden Ring. Wikipedia. So one cool thing you can do if you're curious about this stuff is if you, sorry, this one's Chinese. If you have the wherewithal to look into a foreign language term on Wikipedia, I guess this will work. You can go to the language settings and then look for the equivalent in another language. So it looks like this. Okay, so this one isn't translated into English. But anyway, you could Google Maribito to get like more of a story about that. But yeah, hopefully that answers that question. So like the term Maribito or Newman in Japanese makes it a little bit clearer that they're probably foreigners to the lands between, I guess. So to tie that back into this video and not to just leave our content creator here high and dry, if the Maribito are from if the Newman are from outside the lands between, that just kind of goes hand in hand a bit better with their relationship to the Nox and Marika and the Eternals and all that sort of thing. All right, so let's hop back into this one.
I guess then the question is whether or not a silver tear could father a child, you know? That tends to be why I think that Radagon was not yet a science project when he seduced Renala, and at that time just a alter ego of hers. Again, since we know so little about her goals and just how much she knew and what she didn't know, it all becomes just blatant, like me theory crafting out of what very little threads were given. Even though Marika, of all people, has the most threads, we still don't know what she was trying to do. You know what I mean? We don't really know what her goal was. Now, again, this is a pretty crackpot theory video. I'm not saying any of this shit should be taken, like, with fact. This is just me speculating. So yeah, the Mimic Tear is probably, like, the main ingredient of what Radagon is made up of. But let's assume for the moment that with the right mixture of ingredients, that a god's power could be mimicked. Now, what would Marika have her hands on or have access to that would be something similar to a piece of a fallen god or something like that? Well, she has access to the last fire giant, which happens to house this mysterious fell god who may or may not be an outer god, but we know he's a god of some kind. And we're told that Marika was supposedly unable to destroy this being, so she sealed him in the last giant, basically to stay up in the mountains for eternity and tend the ruin flame and whatnot. Now, whether or not Marika was actually capable of killing the fell god or not is sort of irrelevant, but maybe she needed him alive for her little science project to work. You know, maybe using a piece of a dead god was no good, like it didn't work in her experiment to create a replica of herself. And maybe to truly mimic a god, you need a piece of a living god. In this case, a small portion of the Flame of Ruin itself. Or perhaps it wasn't the fire at all. Maybe it was just...
This is just another crackpot theory, is that maybe by killing the last vessel of a god, the outer god would try to go on to inhabit a new vessel. So it may have been in Marika's best interest to make sure the final vessel that the fell god could inhabit was a small trifling giant, I think she calls it, but definitely the smallest of the fire giants, and a lame one at that. Perhaps both literally and figuratively here.
A chunk of the giant's leg, and that's why he...
Oh, and the reason why I say that is because that may have been what happened with, like, the outer god of rot potentially being like this weird insect thing, and then eventually coming to inhabit the body of Malenia. That's kind of my rationale for that. But again, that's a super big conjecture there.
He's got a bum leg. Maybe she even threw some pieces of a Zamor Knight into the mix because, you know, their natural frost affinity would balance out the infamous Flame of the Fell God, which could explain why that random Zamor Knight imprisoned in the Everjail has Radagon's scar seal. Plus, the heroes of Zamor were noted to have had an intense hatred of the Fire Giants, which could have carried over and created the basis for Radagon's own hatred of the Fire Giants. Maybe he never fought them at all. Or maybe he did fight again.
And I'm trying to remember where it is in retail. Isn't the first Radagon source seal found in the Nox waterfall? Obviously, in 1.0, they were given like different locations, and I know Morgott had Marika's scar seal outside of Leyndell, So they did change some of that stuff around, which I think is kind of important context to consider, that like they didn't really have their stuff quite as planned out as some people think, and that a lot of this stuff is really malleable at the end of the day.
Against them, but his hatred could have still come from being at least partially made of a Zamor warrior, which is my admittedly kind of goofy explanation for why Radagon has red hair and hates it. Because he knows the fire giants are enemies of the Golden Order, which he now loves and has made his whole identity. He probably resented Marika for creating him with red hair in the first place, especially since red hair in general would go on to being like a sign of greatness or a sign of a great hero or warrior, with people like Radagon super proud of having a mane of red hair because of its heroic implications. I can't imagine Radagon was very fond of that, you know what I mean? So yeah, long story short, I believe Radagon was made using pieces of the Flame of Ruin and, of course, a very solid Mimic tier. All created by Marika using Nox science. Maybe it's originally Newman science for all we know. Maybe the Nox and therefore the Carians who learned from the Nox all learned from the Newman, who were supposedly just interlopers from another world. I also think that the Nox at some point did in fact try to use a piece of a fallen god in their experiments to create a lord, but because the god was dead, in this case whatever the Fingerslayer blade used to be, that their experiment just ultimately didn't work. Now my headcanon has always been that the Fingerslayer blade was made of a piece of the One Great, which is probably not true. It's probably made of whatever the Deathbird outer god once was. But if my headcanon was true, had they just waited a little longer for the Flame of Frenzy and therefore the One Great to be reborn into the vengeful demon fire that it was, maybe they would have been successful, although their new lord probably would have been obsessed with bringing chaos to the world. But as always,
I wonder when this was made. Oh, 9 days ago. Okay, I wondered if it came out a while back, like maybe shortly after the game was released. Because one of the more common thoughts about the identity of, or the origin of the Fingerslayer blade is that it may have been previous age's Radagon equivalent, in that it kind of resembles the Sacred Relic sword. So I think I have a couple images to share. So we have the Fingerslayer blade right here, and Sacred Relic sword right here. And obviously, when you look at it like this, they don't bear that much of a resemblance, but when you actually rotate this one all the way like this, and then look back at the other weapon, you can kind of see that it does have a bit of a passing resemblance with the way it's like there's like this weird helical design going along it. But this one has been warped and corrupted, so it just doesn't fully follow the template of the Sacred Relic sword. But then again, that is just one possible interpretation, and it isn't confirmed by any means. And I've wondered whether or not this should have been the original Gloam-Eyed Queen's body, for example.
At least 3 times in the video, I'm getting off subject. Now let's get to why I believe Marika called Radagon back, or just came back if it was just her in disguise. As I said earlier, I tend to lean more that she did the seducing, but I also think it's very possible she sent her copy to go do it as like a test. And since Mimic Tears have wills of their own, that's when he started, plotting. He had the best place ever to learn, the Carian Royal Court. But either conclusion doesn't really matter in this case. We know that he was called back so that Marika could create a couple more Empyreans. But if he's a science project, how the hell does she do that? Are science projects able to reproduce? Probably not. But actually they are. Not in the way that we would think, but I'm pretty sure it's very possible that Marika could have taken...
I'm sorry, just like the phrasing of that was just really funny to me. And the only thing that's just coming to my mind right now is just like Ditto from Pokemon. Like, they can breed with anything. So maybe Mimic Tears are just like the equivalent of Ditto in Elden Ring.
Taken portions of Radagon, the finished product, and then mix those samples with pieces of other powerful beings, or maybe even gods, or deities, or spirits. In Mikola's case, I believe pieces of the at least one of those ancestor spirits that forever slumbers but gains power through this slumbering. I believe pieces of that were used in Mikla's creation, amongst other things. Again, this is where my theory starts getting extremely loose and probably can be poked full of holes, but we're still having fun, right guys? It's funny how bastardized the word theory has become. I imagine a while back they used to be like a science-only word, and now look, it's for fictional lore videos on YouTube by a novice potion brewer like myself. Now, in the case of Melania, I believe she was born with the rot inside her because Marika was trying to use pieces of maybe that sealed away dead god. We do know at least one piece is still around, floating around in the Lake of Rot, which is coincidentally...
I thought one piece was on the Grand Line.
Right beneath, I believe, Noxtella. Interesting stuff. I mean, the piece that's down there could very well be the reason that that lake is a lake of rot. Now, perhaps Marika had a plan when she was doing all this creating of her new offspring. Like, maybe the old rot god was super powerful, and that's why she imbued one of the kids with it, because she knew that the one who was slumbering all the time, Mikola, was going to need a protector. I think at least by the time that, the twins were born, or the second set of twins in this case, that she was definitely already planning to cause the Shattering in some way. We know she was at least somewhat involved with Ranni's plot, and by extension the Knight of Black Knives that left a bunch of her bastards dead, and one of her favorite kids, Godwin, which I can't really discern whether or not that was part of the plan, because again, there's just enough information missing to where we don't have the story in any way. It could be, any of these number of options. Or maybe...
So, yeah, well, I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of this theory because it's, very flimsy, this extraneous stuff right here. I will say that I haven't really considered that Marika or Radagon would have needed, outside ingredients to create their children. So I think that's very fascinating, even if it's something that I don't necessarily believe. So, interesting thoughts here, regardless. And Paul, welcome back to the stream. I meant to say that a bit ago. And Metallic Gnome, welcome in. And you were asking about the Finger Slayer blade, that it could have been made from a previous Elden Lord. I don't necessarily know about that, and I think that would contradict the idea of Godfrey being the first and Radagon being the second. So I think it's more likely it should have been another god vessel, because that's kind of how the Sacred Relic sword is described, that it's wrought from the remains of a god who should have lived a life eternal. So Radagon / Marika, I guess, is what this is supposed to be. Or maybe it's just a reference to the Elden Beast specifically, because I don't know. Wait, doesn't it actually say God slain when he killed the Elden Beast? So yeah, maybe it's another age's Elden Beast. I don't think I've ever thought about it that way. And that might be worth exploring more as well. Yeah, no, I understand that, Eldegusta. I'm just saying, in terms of, keeping the terminology consistent, that it could be, an Elden Lord equivalent. It does say God slain. That's what I thought. So, yeah, maybe this is... Yeah, I guess that technically makes the Elden Beast a god. Or does it really just mean, Radagon or Marika? That's always arguable. Everything is arguable. Yeah, God and Eternal kind of implies Marika. I agree. But we also, her body still persists even after the fact, and Radagon's the one that disappears, kind of, right? Really? Maybe not, because Radagon is Marika, But, especially with, the magic stuff going along with remembrances, it just really makes things difficult, doesn't it?
Maybe I just suck at interpreting stuff. Maybe you guys know the right answer. I don't know, I learn a lot in the comments. I'd be lying if I said I didn't.
So even if you even if your stuff isn't correct, that doesn't mean it doesn't have value. Like I just said a moment ago, I like the idea of Marika and Radagon potentially needing ingredients to create their children like homunculi. That's something I haven't considered and might be more useful in other instances here. So it's fine if you're not right sometimes. It's because it helps build the greater discourse of the game. So just keep doing what you're doing, man.
On a completely unrelated note, though, I want to say that Mog and Morgott were probably, completely normal births, obviously, except for the fact that they're Omen. In fact, the only reason they probably were born Omen was look at their dad. He was like the living embodiment of the Crucible. He was essentially an animal in human form. The guy had to have a fucking Lion King grafted onto him just to calm him down. And presumably he was born and lived most of his life during the Crucible. It only makes sense that they would possess aspects, in their case horns and a tail, of the Crucible.
And one of the things that's really funny to me is the idea that the Lion King on Godfrey's back is the thing that keeps him sane. Just because it's very often associated in like real world mythology that like lions are beasts and beasts are not men because they have like no rationality. So the fact that you need a literal beast to be rational is just kind of a funny juxtaposition of civilization and culture, I guess, here.
So we've talked about, Mikola and Melania, but what about Melina? Well, I'm quite sure that she's also one of Marika's many experiments. I assume she was made using a sample of Radagon and pieces of whatever was left of the infamous Gloam-Eyed Queen, if in fact the Gloam-Eyed Queen isn't Marika. I know a lot of people seem to think that. I always like to view her as like this dark rival that Marika had when she was coming to power, but honestly, who knows? We do know, however, that she had a lot to do with the Rune of Death. Which reminds me of something that Melina herself says, that she's destined to walk alongside destined death. As this kindling maiden now, I'm obviously, all my theories in this video are kind of loose, obviously. It's just a fun bit of speculating. But I do think that this is possible, right? Like, she could have been made with whatever remains or whatever was left of the original Gloam-Eyed Queen, similar to how I'm theorizing that Radagon was made from pieces of the Flame of Ruin, even though the Flame of Ruin isn't God. That would explain why these three are classified, or at least two, in this case. Melina isn't classified as a demigod, but Mikola and Melania are. Because they were technically made from a god, but not really, They were made from a fake god who was made with bits and pieces of a real god. Again, this whole thing just gets very wacky, right? Now, arguably, I think that the biggest evidence that Radagon and Marika are two separate beings is that bit of dialogue that Melina relays to us, where it's supposedly in Marika's own words, "O Radagon, leal hound of the Golden Order, thou art yet to become me. Thou art yet to become a god. Let us be shattered both, mine other self." Now, this isn't the end-all, be-all, obviously. This could be interpreted in a number of ways. The Radagon persona very well could have been like some kind of infection from overexposure to the greater will, and it was quite literally maybe attempting to control her that way. That type of control could be what Ranni was referring to when she says, "I'm not going to let that thing control me." Where if you don't do what it wants, it quite literally starts taking you over and basically assimilating you. Definitely a possibility, but that quote is what got me thinking, maybe he's a science project. I mean, there's a lot of homunculus stuff in the game. There's connections between the Nox and the Newman. But the question at the end of the day is why? Why would Marika need to do this? Why would she need to create a copy of herself, a figurehead, a false leader to be toppled? I mean,
El Degusto asks that, didn't I tell you guys in Japanese they use demigod like in katakana rather than a separate Japanese word? Yes, that is correct. And going back to what he was just talking about right now with the identity of Radagon and Marika potentially being two different people, obviously based on like the last couple of videos we watched, I'm of the opinion that they are one person until I'm like proven otherwise, and that Marika is Radagon rather than just like them being two things that eventually fused. But even like putting that stuff aside, where was I going to go with this? I forgot because it's late and I'm feeling tired.
Thinking maybe he's a science project. I mean, there's a lot of homunculus stuff in the game. There's connections between the Nox and the Newman. But the question at the end of the day is why? Why would Marika need to do this? Why would she need to create?
Oh, right. So one of the things that might be possible, and of course, speculation disclaimer here, is that when... No, I guess that doesn't really work. Never mind. It's late, and I'm having delirious thoughts. Apparently, I was gonna say that Radagon might have come out after Marika decided to change the Elden Ring from Godfrey's time, but that would contradict the way that it said Godfrey went on to become the second Elden Lord. Like, he can't be made at the time that he is created. Well, wait, let me rephrase that. He can't be made the same time he said to, like, change the order, I guess. I'm phrasing that terribly, but hopefully that makes enough sense. So yeah, ignore what I was saying there because it doesn't really make sense.
Create a copy of herself, a figurehead, a false leader to be toppled.
Elder Gusto says, why did Radagon have separate characteristics like being red-haired and giant-blooded while Marika was Newman blonde? Again, we are told that it's a curse of the giants that Radagon was red-haired and he kind of despaired at it. And so the giants might have done something to retaliate against Marika and Godfrey after the war against the giants. It's, of course, unclear what that means. Could Radagon have been a remnant of the giants' will and or the Fire of the Fell Gods' will? Is that why she couldn't fully destroy it? I don't think so, and that stuff is like super speculation. But another silly yet maybe potentially plausible explanation is Marika chose red hair to make him look more distinct from the other types of demigods in Marika herself, so that Renala would be more likely to lower her guard. Or maybe she knew Renala had a thing for redheads. Who knows, right? I'm starting to sound drunk. Yeah, I'm not putting in as much effort, and I am seepy.
I mean, in a way, he makes the perfect decoy, right? Marika sets into motion the things that will lead up to the Shattering, then causes the Shattering, then basically tells all her demigod children, like, alright, well, you guys can attempt to become the new god, but if you guys fail, you'll amount to nothing more than just sacrifices. And I imagine this would spark a bunch of wars that would devastate the lands between. But that wasn't enough. She had also accounted for Godfrey and his followers, the Tarnished, to come back. You know, the former Elden Lord and his tribe of warriors who she sent off to go live and die in the wastelands, essentially keeping this trump card army in reserve until she absolutely needed it. I believe Radagon's ultimate purpose, or the purpose behind his creation, as intended by Marika, was to be the figurehead that gets toppled, to be the final endgame boss that gets killed. I also like to think that she planned to escape Leyndell. Like maybe she thought she'd be able to elude the Greater Will's agents or even Radagon himself, but was caught. Or maybe when she caused the Shattering, she was instantly imprisoned in the Erd Tree, who knows. But I do like to think that she at least planned to escape.
And that might be a decent possibility, especially with the potential collusion between her and Ronnie and the Black Knives. So, even though there isn't a ton to support that theory, I think it's, fairly plausible. You also want to Mimir? Oh, for water. Don't die. No, you. I'll play the game how I want, Noah.
And I believe that place she planned to escape to was the Halleck Tree. It was a hidden away, relatively well-protected, safe area that they could just hang out in while the demigods all killed each other or got killed by Godfrey. And shit, maybe if Marika had made it to the Halleck Tree, Mog would have never been able to steal Mikola. But we see how things all played out, don't we? She also seemingly accounted for Ranni and her followers by having a group of Black Knife assassins on standby to take them out. At least that's what it seems, unless the Black Knife assassins are acting on their own nowadays. But at least Marika had somewhat accounted for the final revenge of the daughter of Renala. They keep going back and forth over how bad the Lunar Queen got it out of all of this. I mean, does she really deserve that fate? I also think it's possible that Marika's decision behind sending her science project, or possibly going herself in disguise, had to be motivated by a curiosity as to how she was able to keep repelling Marika's armies. I mean, it's not
Beans and Rice says that they're pretty sure Miss Chalice said that Renala may have been the astrologer who first discovered the founding Reign of Stars. I don't know if it's necessarily Renala or not, or how much that influences things, But one thing I've wondered is whether or not the founding reign of stars is what brought the amber starlight to the lands between, and would it inadvertently create glintstone after the fact, and that's why it should be considered the oldest glintstone sorcery. And if so, that would potentially, like, unfortunately place like astrologers earlier in the timeline than the arrival of the Elden Ring, which I think is fine because, as I mentioned before on like Tarnished Archaeologist video and some of the other ones, is that we do potentially have depictions of humans before we know of the time of the Erd Tree's existence with those of the Ol and Erd dynasties.
Not like Marika knew that the moon was backing the Carians, or probably what the moon or moons even are, truly. She definitely seems to have some knowledge by the events of the game as she plotted with Ranni. It just, a lot of it all comes back to, we don't really know much about Radagon other than he made some changes to the Carian royal family's way they did things. He made the preceptors wear masks, specifically like constricting ones. This was supposedly done to make it clear that all of their matters were to be kept strictly private, since preceptors were the magical specialists that served the Carian family directly. And these guys were literal badasses who served as retainers in the Carian royal family prior to this, where they were likely given a lot more freedom. Now they were basically charged with making sure no one trespassed in the Carian study and shit like that. It's not necessarily hard to believe why Celavis would be so willing to turn on the Carians, or at the very least to scheme under their noses. He saw the Lunar Queen crumble from within. He saw how Radagon reduced their once great house into little more than a subservient branch of nobility, whose only purpose was to act as pawns for the Golden Order like everybody else. Which was especially crushing because of how long that Carians and Raya Lucaria managed to maintain their independence from the Golden Order. Again, it's not hard to see why the Academy and the Academy Lords all turned against her. I imagine there was even a good number of Carians that weren't willing to fight for her. But they were willing to fight for Carian dominance, and there was a loyalty to their household and their name, which I really appreciated. At least that's how it comes off to me. Maybe I'm misinterpreting. You guys can let me know in the comments. I mean, from their perspective, here comes this guy that they beat in war twice, but because the queen wants to marry him and have some kids, he's allowed to make all kinds of changes that inevitably leads to the Carian royal family being perceived as weak, or at the very least, overthrowable. Because at the end of the day, yeah, Marika probably still would have kept sending armies over there, and Rennala would have kept repelling them. Maybe they would have signed some, like, ceasefire at some point, but that would have just kept going on. And I think many Carians, and even many of the Academy Lords and people who ruled the Raya Lucarian magical school, would all have preferred it that way. They didn't mind fighting if it was a common enemy. It's not like it mattered in the end, though. Once Radagon left, they saw Rennala for as weak as she truly was. I mean, she literally got manipulated into giving over her kingdom to Radagon, basically, who then had some kids with her, and one specifically an Empyrean who might change everything, and then he's recalled back to Marika to create a couple more. And since I imagine everybody knew this, it wasn't hard to round up all the Lake Lords to go to war against the Carians. It's safe to say that Marika enjoys at least a moderate degree of trolling. She, or her science project, basically destabilized Liurnia to the point where it'll never be a threat to the Erd Tree or any of the possible orders that could potentially follow it, while also learning all of their secrets in the process. Again, it's downright comical how salty Marika was about being beaten at war by what I'm sure she considered to be a bunch of up-jumped astrologers playing at being monarchs. And to me, it's stuff like this that makes the Carians the coolest faction in the game. Now, there's very little evidence of it, but I personally believe Marika was going to attempt to help Miquella. I think that's who she was backing as the true new leader of the next order or whatever. You know what I mean? Like the next.
Yeah, and he'd mentioned that earlier, and I meant to say, like, I'm not entirely on board with that, just because I don't think we have enough to kind of follow those claims, unfortunately. Because if anything, well, maybe he's making the argument since, like, Radagon, like, Miquella was, like, Radagon's pet project, that I could see that. So maybe if he's coming at it from that angle, sure.
Next eternal being that will usher in the new world logic that wasn't the Erd Tree. It was going to be his Halleck Tree. Now, again, there's not much evidence backing that Marika helped him or was going to help him before she was inadvertently imprisoned in the Erd Tree with Radagon. But I like to think that the presence of a bunch of Black Knife assassins guarding the only way to access the Halleck Tree is a bit telling. As far as I know, we don't have any reason to believe that the Black Knife assassins don't serve Marika. I mean, we know they don't seem to serve the Golden Order, and they also don't seem to serve Ranni. I guess it's also possible that they serve no one. But that would be really fucking dumb, wouldn't it? I think that most evidence seems to point to some relationship between Marika and the Black Knife Assassins. Maybe they're people who used to serve her and got tired of her and are now against her. That doesn't really make sense as to why they'd be protecting the Hallowed Tree, though. Or maybe they all splintered off into different groups with their own individual ideals, morals, and codes. Or maybe they just offer their services to the highest bidder now. I mean, it can be interpreted a number of ways. They're all found in a lot of different places. Some of them seemingly act as like crypt guardians even, so who even knows, although that one I believe was wounded. I do think it's safe to assume that at the very least Marika intended for Mikola to survive the Shattering, since he was tucked away safely out past the consecrated snowfield at the Hallowed Tree, while using his much more warlike sister to fight the war for him.
So going back to like the Black Knife Assassins, the one who he's showing like right outside Marika's bedchamber has always been a bit of a mystery to me. Like, when you think the Black Knight Assassins should have been purged after the Night of Black Knives, especially from the capital, if nowhere else, it's just absolutely baffling that one should still be so close to the royal family, especially with like Moog literally right next door to it. What the hell, man? Like, what a shining example of what a lord he would be, right? Anyway, it has also been theorized that like the finger readers that are like dead littering the way between like the Erd Tree Sanctuary and Marika's bedchamber could have been killed because of that Black Knife Assassin, but I don't exactly know. At the very least, they're not like burning like black or red like Iji is. They turn invisible at precisely the right moments. Mostly they do, but that one doesn't. I'm pretty sure you can see it from a distance that it doesn't turn invisible at all. The capital is pretty defunct by the time we get there, sure, but just like, how quickly did everybody like lose their minds after the Shattering? Like, we have the story of Electo and Teach running away and Electo getting caught. So what's up with the one that just is... It didn't run away with like a... It pulled a, what are they called? Mary and Pippin on us? Anyway, going back to the video.
Marika probably definitely viewed Malenia as expendable, but a very useful expendable. I think maybe that's the whole reason she could have made Malenia, is that she wanted to have a walking WMD she could use, or maybe she just thought it would be amusing. I don't know, this video kind of came out like a bit of a rambling mess, but I think the channel was overdue for one of those. I find it, relaxing to just wildly speculate sometimes. I mean, I guess that's pretty much how the whole Radagon shit started, just spiraling. And again, at the end of the day, there's not a whole lot of connections or evidence that he's a science project, but this video was a really fun thing to record. I'm going to try and do like a more structured one, mainly focused around Marika's plot soon at some point. It'll definitely be done before the DLC comes out, since the DLC hasn't even been announced yet. Well, its date, I mean. The DLC has, but not the release date. You guys know what I mean. But it's definitely going to be done before the DLC, I can promise that. It's just not super high on the list anymore. Again, apologies if this video was a little too rambly. Since it was so crackpot, I just felt like that was the best way to frame it. But as always, I hope you guys liked the video and found it informative. If you liked it, please like it. If you disliked it, please dislike it. And if you like hearing me rant on and on about various different games now, I'm going to start branching off more now, then please consider subscribing. As always, we got a lot of good stuff coming down the pipe soon, but I don't really want to say what's next because I never really get it right. I'll say one thing's next, and that one thing might not come out for like a week or two. Instead, a different video after different video might come in next. You know what I mean? And who knows? The luck of the draw. Sometimes I just inadvertently stop working on a project I was working on for like a week and start up something else and finish that in like a day and a half. You know, it's just really weird how this YouTube shit works, honestly. I guess everybody has their own unique process though, right?
This dude sounds like my inner ADD voice, just embodied into another person. At least I have enough of a filter where I tend to leave that stuff out unless I'm being like ironic. But yeah, no, this is unironically kind of hilarious. Goddess Baguette said, yo, what's up with the Kaled skull faces? I think there's a very strong possibility that Kaled, Fair Missoula, and the Mountaintops of the Giants could have all been connected, and also potentially connected to Liurnia somehow. Like the whole Pangea theory does kind of make sense for a variety of reasons that I don't want to get into right now because it has like a lot of parts that come together to make it work. So I do talk about that a lot in the Elden lore streams, Elden, like the 1.0 playthrough streams. But it's a little bit unfortunate that I don't have like a direct reference that I can point you to right now. Katie says, you think I'm thinking more about that Black Knife Assassin than Miyazaki did? Maybe. But I mean, that's just kind of par for the course at this point now. Foster says, they definitely used the sentry torches to look out for them after the initial incident, but then the whole war happened, and by the end of it, Lanedale is sealed and no gods are present, and no need to care. So yeah, I mean, they did go ahead and make those torches, but they just never bothered to use them in Marika's bedchamber or anywhere else. Like, did nobody ever walk back towards the throne? Like, what the hell is going on there? Or maybe, I mean, I guess that really presupposes that the Black Knife Assassin was there the entire time and then it just like wandered back into the city. So I guess that's a kind of fair criticism of that idea. But nonetheless, like, what the hell? All right, let's check out the last couple of minutes of this. Of course.
One thing I really like about this theory is it adds a little bit more depth to Mog kidnapping Mikola. Not from Mog's perspective, but from Marika's.
Oh my god, just the the way the auto caption just capitalized Mog.
One thing I really like about this theory is it adds a little bit more depth to Mog kidnapping Mikola.
Just like it picked up on the emphasis. I don't know why that's so silly to me.
Not from Mog's perspective, but from Marika's. If indeed she was putting all her chips on Mikola to be the one who survived the conflicts that followed the Shattering, it's pretty ironic that her true-born son Mog, who she shunned and stuck in the sewer, bypassed all of Mikola's defenses, kidnapped him, and is sort of using him for the same purpose, you know, to usher in this new dynasty. But I imagine this is not in the way that Marika wanted, if indeed she wanted this. Well, again, not this, but him to be the one who won. You guys know what I mean. Anyway, you guys have a good one. I will see you next time. Next video will be pretty soon. It might be Zelda. It might be Elden Ring. It might be Fallout. We'll see. We'll have to see, right? But yeah, you guys have a good one. I'll see you next time.
And of course, closing it with a mimic fight.
Hello, everyone.
Alright, that was the Artificial Lord Theory by Honored Madman. If you guys like the video, go ahead and check out the URL there and give him a like and a sub. And that'll help his channel out. And if you guys enjoyed this stream, please give me a like and a sub if you haven't somehow still. Yeah, anyway. Those are the 3 videos that we'll go through for tonight. And then tomorrow I'm thinking we might look at Charred Thermos and something else. I'll need to like look through my list to just kind of balance out the stream time with the video times. So I'll figure that out. And then that might be the last time I stream for the short near future while I check out Final Fantasy 16 on my own. So for all of you who are still around, whether you've been lurking or commenting, I appreciate it. Hopefully we will catch you on the next stream at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Till then, stay safe and take care. Last Protagonist out.